Chapter 34. Nangong Saishu's face was filled with shock. The harshness of the entrance test was related to the foundation and level of the sect. Green Vine Sword Academy and White Goat Cave were similar cultivation places, so the difficulty of the entrance test was about the same. The 10,000 thread attractions test at Green Vine Sword Academy was similar to this stone tray. Yet even she had used an hour to pass. Just a few dozen breaths. If she could pass, she would break the records of White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy. The other students of White Goat Cave had the same emotions as her. That was why they had exclaimed. Su Qin frowned, a feeling of disbelief surging in his heart. Could it be that this commoner youth really possessed astonishing talent, so he was specially recruited into the academy? Ding Ning looked calmly at him. He did not give this second senior sect brother of White Goat Cave a chance to speak. Then he reached out and opened his palm. Everyone's gaze gathered on his palm. Then, even louder gasps and exclamations rang out. Amidst the gasps and exclamations, Zhang Yi's pupils shrank slightly, and the worry between his eyebrows instantly turned into surprise. Nangong Kaishu was completely stunned. Behind Su Qin, Shunbai, who had been the most vocal in his opposition and had not dared to raise his head after learning of Nangong Saishu's identity, turned even paler, and his chest rose and fell violently. 5 stone beads lay silently in Ding Ning's palm. In the thin flow of gray water, these 5 stone beads did not seem any different from the other stone beads. However, at that moment, everyone was able to clearly see that among the 5 stone pearls, one of them was slightly larger, whereas the other 4 were slightly smaller. It was precisely because of the slightly larger stone bead squeezed into his palm that everyone could see that the other 4 were slightly smaller in size. Even if all 5 were not correct, as long as 3 were correct, one would pass the trial of the flowing year ring tray. In the past, White Goat Cave's fastest passing record was 15 minutes. Ding Ning's performance caused everyone to be deeply shocked. At the same time, they even started to suspect that Ding Ning had deliberately taken out the wrong one to make it easier for them to see clearly. Su Qin's expression did not change much, but he was deeply shocked inside. His gaze flickered violently. Then he did not immediately express his thoughts. He reached out with lightning speed and took the 5 stone beads from Ding Ning's hand. His fingertips touched Ding Ning's palm. In this fraction of a breath, Ding Ning clearly felt a weak presence enter from Su Qin's fingertips and quickly travel through his meridians. He knew what Su Qin's intentions were, so he maintained absolute calm, as though he did not detect anything. Su Qin's heart sank again, and the chill in his heart became even colder. He did not sense any unusual presence. He did not sense any strange presence, which meant that Ding Ning was not a cultivator of a certain level. 5 against 4, you have passed this trial. He glanced at the 5 stone beads in his hand and passed them to the student next to him. He motioned for the student to put away the stone beads and the flowing year ring tray. Then he pointed at the flesh-colored jade soldier in the other box and said slowly, "This is a sensory soldier. Perception is a kind of talent. Even if some people can calm their minds and observe, they do not seem to be fated with the 5 energies and primal energies of the universe in their bodies. They cannot sense the existence of the 5 energies and primal energies of the universe in their bodies. Without this kind of talent, they cannot become true cultivators. This kind of soldier is made from special flesh jade. The energy contained in this kind of jade is similar to the 5 energies in our bodies, but it is easier to touch and sense." Su Qin looked coldly at Ding Ning and said, "The small swords in the hands of the terracotta soldiers are hollow. If you can sense the energy in the terracotta soldiers and feel the flow inside, you can pour the energy out of the small swords like pouring water out of a vase." Ding Ning said, "As long as I can pour out the primordial qi inside, will I pass?" Su Qin nodded.
"Yes."
Ding Ning smiled slightly and said, "If I pass, I can formally enter the sect to cultivate." Su Qin frowned slightly and nodded again.
He did not speak.
Ding Ning did not speak. He took half a step forward and held the soldier in his hand. Since he had decided on the method to pass in the last trial, he did not need to think much about this one. The surrounding world grew silent. This was too simple for him. In his perception, The yuan qi within the jade terracotta soldier was like a river flowing in a cave. His hand moved naturally and adjusted the direction of the flow of the river. He had the river pass through the twisting cliffs and flow towards the only exit of the cave where there was light. There was a soft sound. The water sprayed out of the cliffs and turned into a waterfall. In his hand, the tip of the small sword held by the terracotta soldier was emitting colorful origin energy, forming a beautiful rainbow. Everyone near the mountain gate held their breaths. Even Zhang Yi, who had some confidence in Ding Ning, was stunned. He had thought that Ding Ning would pass quickly, but he had not expected it to be so fast. Nangong Kaishu next to Ding Ning looked dazedly at Ding Ning's calm face, as though she wanted to see a flower on his face. I knew this youth was unusual, but I had not expected him to be so unusual. Even the two old people in front of the tallest temple of White Goat Cave sank into indescribable shock. Du Qingjiao took a deep breath and turned his head to look at Shui Wangshu, whose face was as white as jade, and said slowly. Shui Wangshu said hesitantly, "Could he have cultivated before? There will be no problem." Du Qingjiao shook his head. "I have stayed with him for many hours. If even I cannot sense his abnormality, then he is a grandmaster like Xiao Si and Bai Shan Shui." Shui Wangshu shook his head. He naturally knew that was impossible. But his body has a great problem. Du Qingjiao glanced at him and said. Shui Wangshu stilled and instinctively asked, "What problem?" Du Qingjiao said, "He has a premature aging body, and his energies are too strong." Shui Wangshu's hands trembled slightly. Then this? He had already made up his mind, but now he had no idea. What does it matter? Du Qingjiao seemed to see through his junior sect brother's thoughts and said with a hint of pride, "Arrange for him to enter the cave to cultivate with Zhang Yi and Su Qin." Shui Wangshu understood this senior sect brother of his very well, to the point where he could sense the other's thoughts with just a glance. Yet at this time he did not understand. But his talent is worth White Goat Cave's efforts. As for you, you fear the price spent on him will be wasted? Du Qingjiao smiled coldly and shook his head. Even if it is wasted on him, it is better than following other people's wishes and falling into other people's hands. As to Su Qin, I know you do not like him, and I do not like him. But his talent is not bad. In the past, our master told us that if a person wants to grow faster, there must be people around them to give them pressure. Su Qin is a very good choice. Shui Wangshu pondered for a moment and nodded. He looked at Du Qingjiao seriously, and his eyes were filled with an indescribable emotion. Senior brother, although my cultivation base has been suppressing yours all these years, there are times when your sharpness is something I can't reach. But what is the use? In the end, I still cannot protect White Goat Cave. Du Qingjiao smiled self-deprecatingly. The pride in his eyes disappeared, and he was filled with emotion. I am going to leave. I will trouble you. But very good. You are more tolerant than me. If you can tolerate and not fight, you can go further. White Goat Cave is gone. It is good to leave some seeds. Shui Wangshu looked at Du Qingjiao's eyes. He thought of the storms he and this senior sect brother had experienced in White Goat Cave, and of his impending departure. For a moment, he was speechless. His fate isn't good. However, for him to meet us at this time, it can be considered fate. If there's anything he can give, then give it to him. It's better than letting that woman take advantage of him. Du Qingjiao turned his head, no longer looking at him. His gaze landed on the distant mountain gate. In front of the mountain gates, it was deathly silent. Even Su Qin's face was slightly pale. He and Zhang Yi were the best students of White Goat Cave in decades. Yet even when they entered the sect, they had spent 15 minutes to sense the energy of this jade soldier. Also, this jade soldier was unique to White Goat Cave, and the outside world could not target it. Yet in front of him and everyone else, Ding Ning was like a miracle. In just a dozen breaths, he could clearly sense the energy within, causing the sword in the terracotta soldier's hand to shine. Senior sect brothers and sisters, can you take me in to greet the teachers? While everyone was shocked, Ding Ning smiled calmly. He clasped his hands and bowed to Su Qin, Zhang Yi, and the others as he said softly, Zhang Yi also smiled. He bowed back and said gently and seriously, "Junior sect brother, please." Chapter 35. Senior sect brother and junior sect brother greeting each other. The sect was accepting newcomers. This scene was very warm. This scene was indescribably shocking to the gray-robed swordsman nearby. He knew that this wine shop youth was not ordinary, but he had not expected him to resolve the problems so easily with such an astounding performance. Su Qin looked at this scene silently with his hands by his side. No one knew what he was thinking. With Shun Bai in the lead, the dozens of students who had blocked the mountain gate at the beginning all looked as if they had been slapped dozens of times. However, the students who had rushed over later on, after the initial shock, also came over to congratulate him. But no one had expected that the shock Ding Ning brought today had not yet ended. At this time, a figure slowly floated out from a certain mountain path in White Goat Cave. This was a middle-aged man with a Daoist bun. His face was stern and cold. His eyebrows were like several thin lines, giving people the feeling that they were about to cut the skin on his face. The sword at his waist was thin and long. The scabbard was made from green bamboo. The scabbard was less than 2 fingers wide. One could imagine how thin the sword inside was. But the length of the sword far exceeded ordinary swords. Even though it was hanging at an angle, the end of the scabbard almost touched the ground. The hilt of this sword was longer than ordinary sword hilts. It appeared to be made from red coral from overseas. The entire sword hilt was horizontal in front of him. This sword was hanging on the left side, and the middle of the sword hilt was in front of his right hand. Sect Uncle Daoji. Seeing this cold middle-aged man walk over, all the White Goat Cave disciples gathered near the gates felt a chill and bowed. Li Daoji wasn't just one of the strongest people in White Goat Cave, he also held the disciplinary sword. If a disciple disobeyed the rules of White Goat Cave, he would decide the punishment. "What are you all standing here for?" Li Daoji's gaze did not even land on the other people. He looked coldly at Zhang Yi and said in displeasure, "Have you forgotten what the cave master told you?" Zhang Yi stilled, and then reacted. He said apologetically to Nangong Kaishu and the other Green Vine Sword Academy students next to Ding Ning, "I was careless. Zhang Yi was ordered to take my junior sect brothers and sisters to study in the library cave of White Goat Cave." Study in the library cave? The surrounding White Goat Cave students started to understand why Nangong Kaishu and the others had come today. They felt powerless and humiliated. The Holy One's decree had been issued. White Goat Cave belonged to Green Vine Sword Academy. The students of Green Vine Sword Academy had the opportunity to enter the library cave to study. Today, Nangong Kaishu and the others were the first group. Li Daoji turned around as though he had come out just to remind Zhang Yi. Yet the moment he turned and started to walk, he said coldly, "The cave master has orders for Ding Ning to enter the library cave to study." A series of heavy gasps could be heard. These words caused all the White Goat Cave students around the gates to sink into incomprehensible shock. Yet Li Daoji seemed to feel the shock was not enough. He added, "No restrictions." In this moment, the gates were deathly silent. Other than a few secret arts passed down orally, the library cave of White Goat Cave contained all the scriptures of White Goat Cave, including the understandings of many generations of White Goat Cave cultivators on their own cultivation paths. Even the disciples of the sect would only be able to enter the library for the first time after half a year of study. The library cave was also divided into the inner and outer parts. The mantras and records in the outer cave were easier to understand. Moreover, there were no special restrictions when practicing them. Therefore, any disciple could read and study them. However, the books in the inner cave were more profound. In particular, the experiences and insights of many powerful seniors were not necessarily 100% correct. They needed to be screened by the disciples themselves. Therefore, only disciples who met certain requirements in certain aspects and had contributed to the sect to a certain extent were allowed to enter. "Why?" A loud cry filled with many emotions broke the silence. The one who spoke was Shen Bai. He felt that this was too unfair. Even he had never obtained the qualifications to study in the library cave. So, even though he might face the harsh punishment of sect Uncle Li Daoji, he could not endure it. Yet Li Daoji did not even turn his head. He said coolly, "Just a special case." Shun Bai was stunned.
He could not speak.
The White Goat Cave students around him felt their hearts numb from the repeated shocks, but when they heard Li Daoji's words, they felt it was reasonable. Because of Ding Ning's previous performance, they believed that Ding Ning could enter White Goat Cave as an exception, not because of some shady transaction, but because the cave master had found Ding Ning's unique talent. Since he had not entered the sect during the exam, then what was the problem in making an exception to let him enter the library to cultivate? Looking at Li Daoji's back, Ding Ning's eyes flashed with an unusual expression. Empress, he once again thought of this title that seemed distant due to the great difference in status. Then he thought of that white-haired old man with a sword like a white goat horn. To be able to offend the Empress and these accidents, it seemed that this White Goat Cave was not as ordinary as most people thought. Special envoy. Ding Ning followed Zhang Yi over the stone steel. After the dust settled, no one spoke to stop them. The gray-robed swordsman's eyes were still filled with shock. He drove the carriage away and decided to tell everything that had happened here to Wang Taishu. Zhang Yi was very attentive. Because it was just past lunchtime, he had people prepare some rice balls and sent them to Ding Ning, Nangong Kaishu, and the others after they passed through the gates. Eating and drinking is forbidden in the library cave. When it is time to eat, someone will send food boxes outside the library cave. According to the cave master's orders, each batch of Green Vine Sword Academy can only study for 1 day. As to junior sect brother Ding Ning, the cave master did not say, and sect uncle Li Daoji did not say clearly, so I think there is no time limit.
You can stay until you want to come out and rest.
I will arrange your residence for you. You don't have to worry about anything. As for the cultivation curriculum, your time of entry into the sect is different from the other disciples. Furthermore, the cave master has said that there will be special treatment. When the time comes, I will have to seek the cave master's opinion. Zhang Yi led the way as he introduced. Ding Ning carefully nibbled on the rice balls mixed with wild vegetables and some unknown beast meat as he examined the true appearance of this cultivation place. In the Qin dynasty, the top sects were naturally Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate. These two sects had thousands of inner sect disciples and tens of thousands of outer sect disciples. The thousands of inner sect disciples they had accumulated over the past decades were the best from all over the Qin dynasty, and even the subordinate countries. These two sects were naturally high up, and the other sects could not compare to them. Other than these two sects, there were more than a dozen top sects in the Qin dynasty. Among them, Hung Mountain Sword School and other sects prospered because of the support of outstanding marquises and generals. The others, such as Black Ruins Sword Cave and Jingyi Academy, had deep foundations. White Goat Cave could only recruit a few dozen students with cultivation talent each year. Of all the students who came out, there were only a few who could reach Realm 4 first class. White Goat Cave did not even have the chance to participate in the Min Mountain Sword trials. This meant that before White Goat Cave merged into Green Vine Sword Academy, it had been a third-class sect and could not even compare to some of the outer sect cultivation places of Min Mountain Sword Sect. However, the cultivation places of some eras would always have unique sceneries. When they truly entered the gates of White Goat Cave, Ding Ning finally saw that all of White Goat Cave's halls were supported by pillars and built on the steep rocks on the two sides of the valley. Almost all of the stone steps were artificially carved from the cliffs, and some of the palaces were connected by rope bridges. Most of the palaces were just like a door, and inside were caves. There were no signs of man-made carvings between the trees and river valleys at the bottom of the valley. There were no buildings, and they remained the same. Clearly, the earliest group of cultivators of White Goat Cave had lived in the caves on the two sides of the valley. Our cultivation places and residences are in the caves on the two sides of the cliffs. The caves are warm in winter and cool in summer. Also, the caves of White Goat Gorge have a kind of ash stone that will naturally absorb moisture, so the caves are not as humid as other places. However, the mountain winds are very strong. Junior sect brother, you are thin and not familiar with the roads. If you walk alone, you have to be careful. Also, the places where the stone steps reach are places where the sect disciples can go. As to the places where the rope bridges reach, they require special permission to enter. Zhang Yi introduced in detail and mentioned the caves of White Goat Cave. Hearing this, Ding Ning suddenly interrupted and asked, "Senior sect brother, since it is a special case, can I return to Falling Parasol at night? My aunt is the only one in Falling Parasol's wine shop, and it is rather quiet. Also, I can go back and help with some things." Zhang Yi stilled and then answered, "If it is someone else, it will not be possible. But junior sect brother, I have to have someone ask sect uncle Daoji or cave master." Chapter 36. White Goat Cave was not large. The small temple that looked like a lone island under the white clouds was less than 1,000 feet tall. Zhang Yi stopped as he walked and listed the uses of White Goat Cave's buildings. He spoke of some of White Goat Cave's rules. In less than 15 minutes, the extremely important library cave appeared in front of Ding Ning. Outside the library cave was a small, crude stone hall that was carved out of the mountain. The only way in and out was a rope bridge that swayed slightly in the wind. The wooden planks of the bridge were slightly black and gave people a feeling that it was not very sturdy. The sect uncle of White Goat Cave's disciplinary sword, Li Daoji, who had caused a chill on the mountain path, was standing at the entrance to the bridge. Zhang Yi cautiously went forward, bowed, and asked softly. Li Daoji nodded. Then his cold and authoritative gaze landed on Ding Ning. Cultivation is about being out of the world, being quiet and less disturbed. You spend all your energy on your body and the primal energies of the universe to progress quickly. So all cultivation sects are naturally isolated from the outside world. However, there was also the saying of entering the mortal world for cultivation. Some people who cultivated in the mortal world would have more insights and more opportunities, and their cultivation progress would be faster. Moreover, no matter how powerful a cultivator was, he was still a human. He could not escape the deception of others. If he entered the mortal world, he would not be like a goldfish raised in a clear pond. Once he entered the mortal world, he would not be used to it. The cave master said that you are a special case, but in the end, it depends on your cultivation progress and whether you qualify. He looked at Ding Ning and said slowly. Ding Ning looked at his cold eyes and said, "Sect uncle means that I can return to Falling Parasol, but I first have to prove that my cultivation progress is fast enough." Li Daoji frowned slightly. He didn't know how much this wine shop youth had understood from his words, but he still nodded and said clearly, "You can choose and study the records in the library cave. The cave master will arrange and adjust your living and cultivation based on your performance in the coming days." Hearing Li Daoji's words, Ding Ning did not have any special reaction. But Zhang Yi in front of him, Nangong Kaishu, and the other disciples behind him were shocked and puzzled. While cultivators all used vital energy to move the energy of their natural enemies, and the theory was the same in vital energy cultivation, because each cultivator had different physiques and different energies, the vital energy cultivation methods left behind by countless generations of cultivators were very different. The vital energy formed would also have different characteristics. An extreme example was the true fire palace of the Yan dynasty. Only the direct disciples qualified to cultivate the demon fire art. The primal energies of the universe gathered by vital energy could only form terrifying true fire. The only female bureau chief of the Qin dynasty, Yi Xiling, cultivated the Li Water divine art of Tianyi Sword Pavilion, which manifested as all kinds of water flows. Different methods, sword moves, and other methods to move primal energies of the universe against enemies had different power and effects. Usually, after a disciple entered the sect would teach according to their abilities. They would give some suggestions based on the disciple's potential and characteristics and help him choose suitable methods and sword moves to cultivate. Choosing a cultivation method was the first step to crossing the river in the dark. It would decide a cultivator's life. Yet now, White Goat Cave made an exception and did not give any suggestions, and allowed Ding Ning to choose freely. Even after Li Daoji left and disappeared from everyone's sight, Zhang Yi still could not believe this was true. But he would not go against the decision of the cave master he respected to the extreme. So after he passed through the rope bridge and led Ding Ning, Nangong Kaishu and the others into the stone hall outside the library cave, he couldn't help but warn Ding Ning with a bitter expression. Junior sect brother, there are many vital energy methods in the library. Many of them are powerful and have their own characteristics. But you have to see if they have any weaknesses and if they're suitable for you. So you have to consider carefully. The stone door of the library cave slowly opened and revealed a stone staircase that slowly led upwards. When you started the growth ring stone disc test, you took out one of the 5 stone beads incorrectly. Did you do it on purpose? From the entrance to the library cave, Nangong Kaishu had purposefully maintained a distance from Ding Ning. As she and Ding Ning started to enter the cave, Nangong Kaishu finally could not help but walk up to Ding Ning and ask seriously. Ding Ning had not expected her to be thinking about this. He turned and saw her curious and serious gaze. He couldn't help but smile slightly. You did it on purpose so that everyone would have a comparison and be able to distinguish right away, right? Nangong Kaishu saw something from his smile, and her heart shook. If I could quickly take out 4, of course I could get all 5 right. Ding Ning glanced at her and said softly, I just did not want to spend too much time. From the start, you knew you could pass the entrance test. Hearing his words, Nangong Kaishu's brow furrowed deeply. She looked suspiciously at Ding Ning. This matter is too strange. Even if you know you are a genius, you should not have such absolute confidence. Also, the cave master of White Goat Cave gave you such an exception and did not give you any suggestions when you entered the library cave to choose cultivation records to be able to pass the growth ring stone disc and the jade soldier test so quickly, unless you have practiced countless times with them. You are not the illegitimate child of the cave master of White Goat Cave, right? Ding Ning had been listening with interest, but when he heard her last conjecture, he almost fell on the stone steps. Miss Nangong, your imagination is too rich. He looked at Nangong Kaishu, whose eyes were filled with suspicion, and said helplessly, a person with such rich imagination like you should go to the astrology bureau to investigate in the future. Did you really just rely on absolute talent? Nangong Kaishu's eyes were still filled with disbelief. As she thought, she said, but since you are certain you have such talent, why did you not participate in the spring test of each sect? Everyone in Chongling should know that other than sects like Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate, most other sects do not have any prerequisites. Anyone of the right age can participate. Also, with your performance today, if you did not cheat, you can enter a better sect. Ding Ning's heart sank slightly. This was a flaw that could cause suspicion. In the future, people would have such suspicions. He had to give a reasonable explanation. He frowned slightly, thought and said, cultivation is not something everyone can think about. At the start, I did not know I had the potential to become a cultivator until Fang Shumu came to see me, until I met Wang Taishu. Fang Shumu? Fang Ho Province's Fang Shumu? Nangong Kaishu was shocked. Fang Qilin, one of the 13 marquises of the Qin dynasty, was old. Yet in these years, Fang Ho Province showed no signs of decline and seemed to surpass the other marquis establishments. This was because Fang Qilin had 2 enviable sons. One of the sons, Fang Xiang, was like Nangong Kaishu's father, a powerful general who guarded the outer vassal cities. The other son, Fang Shumu, was famed for being a sword maniac. He had no interest in anything other than cultivation. While the outside world did not know what level Fang Shumu's cultivation had reached, at least a decade ago, many of the true nobility of Chongling were certain that Fang Shumu was the fastest to break through among all the people of similar age in Chongling. Based on his cultivation speed, even the 2 ministers and the Yuanwu Emperor had concluded that he was the cultivator with the highest chance of reaching Realm 7 first class among the young cultivators of Chongling. Above the 7th realm was the 8th realm. It was a realm that very few cultivators had reached since ancient times. A person who could receive such praise from the 2 ministers and the Holy One was a legend for Nangong Kaishu. Who is Wang Taishu? Nangong Kaishu breathed deeply and tried to calm herself down. She looked at Ding Ning and asked, the master of 2-level tower, the master of a gang in the streets. Ding Ning looked at Nangong Kaishu and said softly and calmly, Fang Shumu came to see me. I knew I had good cultivation potential, but Fengho province still gave up on me because my body had a troublesome problem. Later, I encountered Wang Taishu, who was fighting with other gangs and wanted to gamble. So I decided to gamble and use his arrangements to enter White Goat Cave to cultivate. Gamble? Nangong Kaishu asked in bewilderment. What troublesome problem does your body have? Ding Ning looked at her. A premature body, with too much energy. If one does not have special encounters, they may die even faster after they start to cultivate. Ding Ning's words were calm, but in Nangong Saishu's ears, they were like thunder. Her breathing paused. Die even faster. How fast? Ding Ning said, maybe in my 30s. Nangong Kaishu stopped in her steps. Her face paled. She could not imagine that a youth like Ding Ning, who was like a rising sun, could only have a dozen years of lifespan left, and he could discuss this matter so calmly. So, I am not the illegitimate child of the cave master of White Goat Cave. He may have made an exception for me because he feels that no matter what I cultivate, it will be useless in the end. Ding Ning smiled at her and said, another possibility is that he wants to see my judgment. After all, cultivation still depends on oneself. He wants to see if I can use my intuition to choose a method more suitable for myself so that I can live a few more years. Looking at his smile, Nangong Kaishu was speechless for a long time. She inexplicably thought of a saying. Some people cultivated for more glory, and some people cultivated because cultivation was their life. Ding Ning continued to walk forward. He reached the end of the slanting stone steps. A cavern that seemed to be bathed in gentle sunlight appeared in front of him. This was a cavern with many ventilation holes at the top. There should be many refracting crystals in those ventilation holes. Gentle light fell on every corner of the cavern, but blocked the wind and rain. Everything in the cavern seemed to be in a state of absolute stillness. The bookshelves on the four walls of the cavern were filled with all kinds of books. On the side of the bookshelf in front of him, there was a narrow staircase that should lead to the inner cavern. Ding Ning officially stepped into the library cave. Starting from the left side, he started to seriously read the books on each bookshelf. Nangong Kaishu focused and followed. As a student of the Green Vine Sword Academy, she was fortunate enough to enter the library of another sect. She naturally had to use every minute to read as many things as possible to see if she could find anything helpful to her cultivation. But at this time, most of her thoughts were focused on Ding Ning. She really wanted to know what kind of cultivation method Ding Ning would eventually choose. Chapter 37. In the small temple at the highest point of White Goat Cave, Shui Wangshu looked at the empty sky and floating white clouds. Thinking of the death of a master brother by his side, Shui Wangshu felt his body and mind were indescribably empty. He sighed softly and asked Li Daoji, who was standing respectfully at the door of the temple, "Has that youth entered the cave?" Li Daoji nodded. "If he chooses a cultivation manual, let me know as soon as possible," Shui Wangshu said with satisfaction. Li Daoji nodded, but his sharp eyebrows unconsciously rose. "Master, why are you so interested in him?" Shui Wangshu's eyes were emotional. He said softly, "Not just because this youth is special, but also because this youth is a seed your sect uncle Du Qingjiao left for White Goat Cave. When you reach my age, you will naturally understand what it feels like to see those people you have been with for many years leave one by one." Looking at this old man who was starting to reminisce, Li Daoji bowed seriously and turned to leave. Life Preservation Scripture. Finger Secrets. Inner View True Guide. 9 Realms of Cultivation. Truth Comprehension Scripture. White Goat 34 Sword Manual. 9. Inkli Zhao Spell. A Brief History of Chongling's Cultivation. True Fire Differentiation. For ordinary cultivators, the cultivation records in this kind of library cave were as vast as the sea. Even if they were organized neatly, they would be dazzled. So, like the libraries of most sects, White Goat Cave's library cave was not organized and the records were not placed in order. Ding Ning knew better than Zhang Yi that all the vital energy cultivation methods had their own advantages and disadvantages. Other than some especially heaven-defying secrets, there was no clear distinction between good and bad cultivation methods. So, He was not in a hurry to enter the inner cave. He just moved forward one by one, not letting go of a single bookshelf. Looking at the densely packed characters on the spines or scrolls, he did not feel the shock and fanaticism that ordinary people would feel. Many of these books were naturally extremely mediocre to him, but his gaze was still extremely serious and cautious. The 9-death silkworm he cultivated was the most profound method in the world, and had many wondrous uses that the cultivators of the world did not know of. Yet his 9-death silkworm could not be exposed under the sunlight of Chongling. Before he was strong enough, he needed a cultivation method to conceal himself. Most of the time, he needed to use the true essence produced by this cultivation method to fight. This cultivation technique had to be the most suitable for the current him. Therefore, this was no less than a brand new cultivation. Red Phoenix, divine radiating scripture. Suddenly, he stopped. His finger landed on the ancient book with a reddish-yellow cover. This was a true essence cultivation method that he had heard of but had never seen before. Flipping open the cover made from thick butter paper, his thoughts were immersed in this book whose pages had turned yellow. The contents were the same as what he had heard. This true essence cultivation method was very suitable for his present state. This true essence cultivation method required abundant energies. The natural state of his body meant that he could simplify the energy cultivation process. His cultivation speed would be much faster than ordinary methods. Also, the vital energy and true essence produced by this method was very beneficial to his dual cultivation with Zhongsun Qianxue. He read for a moment, put away the book, held it in his arms, and then continued forward. 5 Yang righteous body was also beneficial to his dual cultivation with Zhongsun Qianxue. While it was not as fast as the Red Phoenix Godly Radiating Sutra, his flesh and blood would be stronger. This method was not bad. Still light flow method, a cultivation method that could make the flow of vital energy faster. This way, the speed of going from energy refinement realm to vital energy realm would be much faster than ordinary methods. Ding Ning was completely immersed in it and unconsciously held 3 books in his arms. Sitting Deluded Heart Sutra, suddenly, these 4 words fell into his eyes. His body trembled slightly, and his face instantly stiffened. His gaze held a hint of disbelief as he quickly moved forward. Heavenly reflection, spirit shedding method, fate reversal method. He quickly caught these words on the bookshelf in front of him. He took a deep breath and felt a strange itch in his body. Just these familiar words allowed him to understand why White Goat Cave had offended the Empress and was forced to merge with the Green Vine Sword Academy. These were books that should not have existed in the Qin dynasty. In the first year of Yuanwu, in order to stabilize the throne he had just taken, and to eliminate the traces of that person's existence, countless cultivators were killed. Many sects were convicted of rebellion. After those sects were destroyed, in order to express their loyalty to the Holy One and the Empress, and to prevent the Holy One and the Empress from worrying about those sects rising from the ashes, countless books related to those sects were burned to the ground. In fact, as time passed, many things of the past became stories. Even if there were some records left behind by those sects, the present cultivators would have a hard time connecting themselves to those sects and wanting to do something for those sections. Yet this represented a kind of attitude the Holy One and the Empress did not want any possibility. The fact that there were books in White Goat Cave's history cave that should have been destroyed meant the attitude of some cultivators of White Goat Cave. Even if they simply felt that cultivation methods were not sinful, for the cultivators of the world, any comprehension on the path of cultivation was a rare experience. But many people in Chongling felt that they had a thread of sympathy for those sects and had a different view of some of the events of the past. Ding Ning was filled with an indescribable feeling. He looked deeply at those books that were likely the only ones in Chongling. His slightly stiff fingers did not touch them and continued to slide forward on the bookshelf. His emotions gradually calmed down. Explanation of the Spirit Source Way. A thin, ancient book inexplicably attracted his gaze. In his memories, this was a cultivation method that came from the Spirit Source True Treasure sect of the Zhao. It was extremely ordinary and circulated among the people of each dynasty. This ancient book was clearly not valued by anyone in White Goat Cave. The old cover was damaged, and no one had repaired it. From the marks where the book touched the bookshelf, this ancient book had not been touched for many years. But through the damaged cover, Ding Ning saw that some of the movement diagrams inside did not seem so ordinary. He couldn't help but frown slightly. He carefully took out the ancient book and slowly opened it. His brows immediately furrowed even deeper, and his eyes began to flicker with an abnormal light. The description at the beginning was not much different from the explanation of the Spirit Source Way, but the first movement diagram was not simple. The more he flipped, the more shocked Ding Ning was. He was certain that this was not an ordinary explanation of the Spirit Source Way, but an extraordinary cultivation method that had been mistaken for an ordinary explanation of the Spirit Source Way. Flipping through a few more pages, he saw a few profound and cryptic words next to a movement diagram that most cultivators could not understand. Immersed in it, Ding Ning almost cursed. This was not an ordinary method passed down by an ordinary sect before the Zhao dynasty. This was clearly the secret method of the Selfless Palace, one of the 3 great cultivation places of the Han dynasty, the killing 3 corpses selfless origin scripture. For ordinary cultivators, the 3 corpses refer to the 3 evil desires of a person: selfish desire, appetite, and lust. These 3 desires were detrimental to cultivation and had to be suppressed. Only the Selfless Palaces, killing 3 corpses selfless origin scripture, had to stimulate these 3 desires in the process of cultivation, and then at some crucial stages of cultivation, forcefully cut off these desires. In the process of stimulating these 3 desires, the cultivators' 5 energies would be more exuberant than ordinary cultivators. Once they were cut off, if they succeeded, their mental power and state of mind would be greatly improved. This was a dangerous technique that would allow one to survive in the face of death. At the same time, it was also a powerful technique that surpassed ordinary cultivation techniques. Decades before it was destroyed by the Qin dynasty, the Han dynasty and the neighboring Wei dynasty had fought continuously. The Selfless Palace was destroyed in a great defeat of the Han dynasty. According to legends, the Selfless Palace occupied thousands of hectares. After it was destroyed, the flames that burned the Selfless Palace did not extinguish completely for a month. In the battle back then, the treasures and records of the Selfless Palace were stolen by the defeated armies of the Han dynasty and the Wei dynasty. Many of the surviving cultivators of the Selfless Palace stole some things and fled, or destroyed them to prevent useful records from falling into the hands of the Wei army. Countless remnant pages of records danced in the flames like butterflies. Ding Ning did not know how this killing 3 corpses selfless origin scripture, disguised as an ordinary method, had ended up in the library cave of White Goat Cave, but he was certain that this method was extremely powerful, and he would be able to cultivate it quickly. At the same time, he was certain that even the inner cave of White Goat Cave that he had never entered before could not have a method stronger than this. So he put down the 3 records in his bosom and only took this one. Then he stopped looking at vital energy cultivation methods and focused on choosing movement and sword scriptures that were compatible with him. As time passed, he entered the inner cave. The inner cave was only 1/3 the size of the outer cave, but the records inside were more profound and detailed than the ones outside. In the end, his finger landed on a sword manual with a very ordinary name. This sword manual, with a black cover, was called the Wildfire Sword Manual. Then he lost interest in the records here and walked towards the several meditation mats at the side. Don't tell me that you've only chosen these 2 ancient books after choosing so many? You want to cultivate these 2 records? 2 incredulous voices sounded in the silent cave and reached Ding Ning's ears. Chapter 38. Ding Ning turned around. He saw Nangong Kaishu standing behind him with an expression of disbelief. Did you really choose these 2 records and prepare to cultivate them? Looking at Ding Ning's expression, Nangong Kaishu could not help but ask again. Ding Ning nodded and said, "Yes." "How much do you know about cultivation, or rather, do you even understand what cultivation is?" Hearing Ding Ning admit that he really had such plans, Nangong Kaishu was so angry her lips trembled. Ding Ning looked at this pale young girl and said calmly, Is there a problem? Do you know what kind of ancient books these are? Nangong Saishu's angry gaze landed on the two records in Ding Ning's hands. Her eyelashes trembled. Do you know that the spirit source way truth is just a shallow, vital energy cultivation method? There is nothing special about it. Also, this vital energy cultivation method comes from the Zhao. As a Qin person, if you cultivate this method, you will not obtain any special benefits and will attract the displeasure of many important people. As to this wildfire sword, it is not powerful but is extremely complex and difficult to cultivate. The sword forms are hard to learn, and the combination of vital energy and vital energy is extremely complicated. Our Green Vine Sword Academy also has this sword method, but none of my senior sect brothers and sisters have ever chosen to cultivate this sword method. You mean the combination of the method I chose and this sword method is very poor? Ding Ning smiled slightly and said. Seeing Ding Ning still able to smile, Nangong Saishu's face grew cold. Not very poor. It cannot be worse. Since you are different from us, and there is no time limit to studying here, why can't you spend more time and carefully read the contents of each record? You should know that not all White Goat Cave disciples have the chance to enter the inner cave to choose records from the start. Your starting point is higher than theirs. Why do you not treasure it? Ding Ning looked seriously at her and said softly, But what does my choice have to do with you? Nangong Kaishu stilled. This did not seem to have anything to do with her. She had followed him to see what kind of ancient books he was going to choose out of curiosity. Now, she was angry because she wanted to see a wonderful show. In the end, she saw a clumsy performance that did not match the show and was too disappointed. But what did this have to do with her? She and Ding Ning had only met once before today and could not even be considered friends. How I cultivate is my own matter. But I know you are doing this for my own good, so I am really grateful to you. Ding Ning looked at her and said, Also, different records are different for different people. I am certain these two records are suitable for me. If other people had said this to Nangong Kaishu before they started to cultivate, Nangong Kaishu would have felt that this person was either ignorant or an idiot. But thinking of Ding Ning's confidence and performance outside the gates, and seeing Ding Ning's calm and confident gaze, Nangong Kaishu asked dazedly, You are certain? I am certain. Ding Ning nodded and said sincerely and seriously, Also, quickly search for the things you need. You have wasted a lot of precious time following me. Nangong Kaishu still felt this was absurd, but Ding Ning's previous words had some effect. Regardless of how absurd Ding Ning's confidence looked, nothing was more important than her cultivation right now. She didn't say anything more. She took a deep breath and tried her best to calm herself down. Then, she began to flip through the ancient books in the inner cave. The other students of the Green Vine Sword Academy were immersed in the knowledge and experience of cultivation. The library cave became unusually quiet again, with only the rustling of pages. Beams of bright light fell on Ding Ning's body and the ancient booklet that was spread open on the futon in front of him. He quickly forgot about the world around him and threw himself into a new cultivation. Today, White Goat Cave had given him many surprises. This book had been disguised as an ordinary cultivation method, but in reality, it was a great treasure for the top sections. For him, this was a rare surprise and opportunity. Even he wanted to know what kind of different wonders this cultivation method would have. The notes and pictures on the pages of the book appeared clearly in his mind as he slowly thought about it. Then, they slowly connected and became clear and real. He slowly closed his eyes. The first step of cultivation was to look inside with one's mind and feel the energies in the body. For ordinary people, it would take an unknown amount of time to reach this first step and feel the existence of the energies in the body. Yet the moment he closed his eyes, he had completed the first step. Driven by his psyche power, the 5 Qis in his body began to follow the path of this cultivation method. They slowly moved through his body and moved towards his sea of Qi. Different cultivation methods were like the seal lines on different seals. Different paths of the 5 energies in the body would transform differently in the body and produce different vital energy and vital energy in the future. This principle was not complicated. Any vital energy cultivation method was a mental power exploration of the body. It was the transformation of the energies in the body and the primal energies of the universe. However, this brand new process and mysterious transformation was filled with countless unknown dangers. Time silently passed. Night started to cover White Goat Gorge. A White Goat Cave student delivering food was close to the rope bridge leading to the library cave. Nangong Kaishu and several outstanding students of the Green Vine Sword Academy were completely engrossed and forgot the time. Even their movements of flipping the pages slowed. Suddenly, Nangong Kaishu and the Green Vine Sword Academy students felt a breeze. This breeze was very weak, but the air in the library cave seemed to have solidified. So for cultivators like them, this breeze was an abnormal change and worthy of being wary. Nangong Kaishu instinctively looked up. Because of her body's natural nervousness, her breathing paused slightly. She found that this breeze came from Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's body seemed to have a wave charging into an empty place and forcing out some of the presence of that empty place. This was the source of the wind. She was dazed. But in the next moment, she saw that under Ding Ning's skin, there seemed to be a light that had not been there before. There seemed to be a 5-colored jade light flashing. She started to think of when she first started to cultivate. She thought of when her senior and junior sect brothers had their breakthroughs, opened their energy seas, and officially became Realm 1/3 class cultivators. This was inner perception, comprehending the 5 energies and opening the energy sea. These words finally appeared in her mind. Then her body was taken over by an unprecedented shock. She started to tremble uncontrollably. The other Green Vine Sword Academy students started to realize what had happened. Their bodies started to tremble violently. They looked worse than Nangong Kaishu. Their faces were snowy white. They opened their mouths but could not make a sound or breathe like fish dying of thirst. How long had it taken them to open their energy seas, step into Realm 1/3 class of profound understanding, and become true cultivators? Even the fastest among them had taken a full 7 months to do so. But from choosing cultivation manuals to starting to comprehend, to opening the energy sea, this wine shop youth from Falling Parasol had only used half a day. Profound understanding in half a day. The White Goat Cave student who came to deliver food to the library cave was Yi Ming, who had been responsible for welcoming Ding Ning at the start of the day. He carried the food box. Before he stepped into the stone hall outside the library cave, he saw Li Daoji walk out of the stone hall with a pale face. He didn't even look at him and floated past him. Yiming found it strange. He didn't know what happened to sect Uncle Li Daoji. While he was just as silent, he did not seem as authoritative and cold as usual. Li Daoji walked quickly across the rope bridge with his head bowed. His body flashed in the night, passed through several white clouds, and landed on the platform outside the small temple at the highest point. He took a deep breath and said in a trembling voice, "That youth has already chosen a cultivation manual and sword manual." Shui Wangshu, who had been sitting in the cave as though he had fallen asleep, immediately opened his eyes. His eyes were as bright as stars. What did he choose? Li Daoji said, "True explanation of the Spirit Source Way, Wildfire Sword Manual." Shui Wangshu stilled and instinctively reached to touch the teapot on the stone table. He murmured, "This is not good. It does not match. No wonder your voice is trembling in anger." Li Daoji slowly raised his head and used great effort to say, "Not from anger, because he has reached profound understanding. He just entered Realm 1 and opened his energy sea." "What did you say?" Shui Wangshu's hand shook and almost broke the teapot in his hand. Li Daoji took a deep breath, looked at him, and repeated seriously, "He reached profound understanding in half a day." Chapter 39. Shui Wangshu looked at Li Daoji's trembling lips and did not dare to believe this was true. Monster. After a few breaths, he finally calmed down and spat out these 2 words. In the library cave, Nangong Kaishu and the other students of the Green Vine Sword Academy trembled and looked at Ding Ning like they were looking at a monster. How was this possible? profound understanding in half a day. In their impression, in the rumors known to the outside world, from the first year of Yuan Wu until now, only in Baoshe of Lingshu Sword Gate and Jing Liuli of Min Mountain Sword Sect had done it. Even the sword maniac Fang Shumu had taken dozens of days to reach profound understanding. Even though she knew that this was happening in front of her and not an illusion in her perception, Nangong Kaishu, who was in great shock and disbelief, could not help but look at Ding Ning, who was opening his eyes. She asked in a trembling voice, "You have opened your energy sea?" Ding Ning did not immediately answer her question. He frowned slightly as he sensed the flow of energies in his energy sea. He faintly sensed that the top method of non-self palace walked a very domineering path. Then he noticed the beam of light in front of him. The beam of light was still soft and bright, but it was slightly different from before. The previous beam of light was like pure sunlight that had been filtered, but now, the beam of light clearly carried the light of gemstones. He reacted. It was already night outside. It took so long.
He muttered to himself.
His words were completely from the bottom of his heart. This was definitely because the flow of the 5 Qi in this severing 3 corpses selfless self-origin sutra was very different from the majority of cultivation methods. Otherwise, under the situation where his Qi Si actually existed, guiding the 5 Qi into his Qi Si would not take so long. Furthermore, he had only cultivated for half a day and had just poured his 5 Qis into his Qi Si. At this moment, his hands and feet felt weak. This kind of consumption made him understand that this cultivation method was indeed very unique. In the future, the Zhen Qi and Zhen Yuan formed would definitely contain more violent power than ordinary cultivation methods. If it was an ordinary cultivation technique, he would be able to reach the profound understanding realm in less than half an incense stick's time. But his words had a completely different meaning in the ears of Nangong Kaishu and the others. "You took so long?" Nangong Kaishu started to tremble. She couldn't help but point at Ding Ning. "If you really have reached profound understanding and opened your energy sea, do you know how long it takes for ordinary cultivators to reach this level?" Ding Ning looked at her trembling white finger and didn't know what to say. "I'm not an ordinary cultivator." Although this was the truth, when it fell into her ears at this moment, it was perhaps too arrogant and pretentious. Looking at him frowning, Nangong Kaishu started to wake up. "Are you a true monster, like the people of Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate?" She took a deep breath and withdrew her trembling finger. With a complex expression, she said, "Did you choose a cultivation technique like the Spirit Source Tao Quintessence because it's the easiest for you to understand, and it's the easiest for you to break through your cultivation base?" Ding Ning smiled apologetically. He felt that he could not explain these things to her. Also, the cultivation of any cultivator was a tightly guarded secret. But when Nangong Kaishu saw his apologetic smile, she thought that he was apologetic because his talent was far greater than theirs. In her heart, she also found an explanation for why Ding Ning chose such an ordinary cultivation method like the true explanation of the way of spiritual source. Because of Ding Ning's physical problems, and because his lifespan was not as long as other people, he had to choose a method that was relatively simple and could progress faster. "It seems that you are a true monster." She was slightly sad and lowered her head dejectedly. "It seems that I should not have doubted your abilities from the start. I should not have meddled in other people's business." Among the pale-faced Green Vine Sword School students behind Nangong Kaishu, the most composed youth's eyes flashed, and he could not help but move. "Lu Malong, if you want to gain some good feelings from this person, I advise you not to go forward." However, at this moment, the shortest youth beside him, whose black hair was draped over his shoulders, said softly in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "It's already too late to express some friendliness now." Hearing these words, the young man named Lu Malong immediately froze, his heart filled with regret. He knew that the other party's words were correct. This wine shop youth was young, but he seemed to have calm eyes that could see through everything. Outside the sect, when Nangong Kaishu had stood up for him, they had not thought much of this youth. Now, because of the terrifying talent the other showed, if they tried to make friends, they would not be able to gain any friendship from the other. To them, Some courteous words on the surface were completely meaningless. It was better not to embarrass themselves. Multiple Green Vine Sword Academy students started to search for the cultivation knowledge and experience they wanted. In order to throw away their shock, disappointment, and regret, they purposely moved further away from Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning. Ding Ning felt very hungry. He could even smell the fragrance of food outside the library cave. He stilled and then smelled the natural and faint virgin fragrance of Nangong Kaishu. A hint of shock rose in his mind. He immediately reacted. This should be another change brought about by the Kill 3 Corpses Selfless Self-Essence Sutra. This was a top-class cultivation method from the Han Dynasty. When he had just reached the profound understanding stage, it had already made him much more sensitive to smell and smell. He did not reject this change in perception. He took a deep breath and prepared to stand and walk out of the library cave to eat. For him, today's cultivation had ended. If White Goat Cave did not have special arrangements, he would choose the wine shop in Falling Parasol. But at this time, he noticed the open book in Nangong Saishu's hand. He hesitated slightly and looked at Nangong Kaishu, who had her head bowed. He said softly, "What major problems do you have in your cultivation?" Nangong Kaishu, who was still emotionally unstable, shook slightly. She looked up and looked into Ding Ning's eyes. She said suspiciously, "You want to help me?" Everyone's cultivation is different. Ding Ning looked at her and said seriously, "At most, I will discuss with you. As to whether it will be useful to you, that is unknown. It is fine even if you cannot help me." Sensing Ding Ning's true kindness, Nangong Kaishu was inexplicably happy. Young girls of her age usually had the best idea of friendship. Her disappointment just now was likely not due to the difference in talent between her and Ding Ning, but because Ding Ning had maintained a respectful attitude towards her good intentions. "There is a problem with my comprehension." Thinking that the other was a true monster who had reached profound understanding in half a day, and had even chosen his own method, she grew more excited and quickly added, "There is a problem with your comprehension of primal energies of the universe?" Ding Ning looked at her shining eyes and asked seriously.
Yes.
Nangong Kaishu nodded seriously. "My cultivation has reached Realm 2 first-class marrow transformation. At this realm, I can try to sense primal energies of the universe. I have done so because the key to breaking through from Realm 2 Energy Refinement Realm to Realm 3 Vital Energy Realm is to find primal energies of the universe that can merge with one's own physical energy. Drawing primal energies of the universe into one's body is the key. As long as one can draw some primal energies of the universe into one's body, there will be no problems with the merging of one's physical energy and primal energies of the universe." Ding Ning looked at the open records in front of her. "You cannot sense the existence of primal energies of the universe at all, or are you unable to sense the difference between primal energies of the universe because it is a ball of chaos?" Nangong Kaishu shook her head and said softly, "If that is the case, my teacher and I will not be in such a hurry. I can sense the existence of primal energies of the universe, and I can even sense that each strand of primal energies of the universe is different. But in my perception, each strand of primal energies of the universe is resistant to me, as though each strand of primal energies is not close to me. Maybe it is because of my constitution. When my father cultivated, he had the same problem as me. He was stuck from Realm 2 to Realm 3 for 7 years. After a pause, Nangong Kaishu said worriedly, "Because of this concern, he did not have me cultivate the 10,000-wave true water art he is skilled in, and had me cultivate the Green Vine Sword Academy's greenwood art. But now I have encountered the same problem as him. I broke through from Realm 1 to Realm 2 first class. I am the fastest student of the Green Vine Sword Academy. But if I am stuck at this level for 7 years, I may be slower than most people." Ding Ning nodded. He reached out and closed the book in front of Nangong Kaishu. "Minute Differentiation of Primal Energies." He softly read the name of this book. Then he frowned and asked seriously, "So you came to the White Goat Cave library cave to see if the books and notes here can give you some inspiration?" Nangong Kaishu nodded. "My father did not have any special comprehension of his breakthrough. He just felt the primal energies of the universe enter his body during a dangerous battle. If I cannot find the reason, maybe what awaits me will be a more tragic experience than the past 7 years. If one was stuck in Realm 2 for 7 years, it would be very tragic. Especially when one saw the people around them surpass them and leave them far behind. They may feel despair. Ding Ning thought carefully. These 2 notebooks seem to contain a lot of unique insights. Why don't you take a closer look? He quickly stood up and flipped through more than a dozen books. In the end, he picked 2 books and placed them in front of Nangong Kaishu. He said, seriously, take your time. I will go out and eat something. Then I may return home. Notes of the Master of the Banana Pond on Ba Mountain. Theory of Opening the Heavens. Nangong Kaishu looked in shock at these 2 books of seemingly casual notes and flipped them open. Chapter 40. Ding Ning slowly walked out of the library cave, opened the food box placed at the door of the stone hall, and took out his portion. Then he sat on the stone bench at the entrance of the hall, slowly eating the still warm vegetables, and began to sort out today's harvest in his mind. The 3 corpses non-self origin sutra disguised as an ordinary cultivation method was definitely a very overbearing cultivation method. Not only could it allow one to have a better perception than ordinary cultivation methods, but the Zhenyuan cultivated in the future would definitely be very violent. If the true essence cultivated from an ordinary cultivation method was like a huge wave in a river, then the true essence of this cultivation method should be like a huge wave that contained a beast that was difficult to control. As to the Wildfire Sword Manual, it was a sword manual that the cultivators of Chongling had seriously underestimated in these years. The true meaning of this sword manual was not the wildfire burning the plains, but that the wildfire could not burn and would grow again when the spring wind blew. Because the sword moves were too complex, very few people cultivated this sword manual. This caused even fewer people to discover the true sword essence of this sword manual. But for Ding Ning, complexity was not a problem. This was the first step of starting over. He was very lucky and walked well. An unusual night wind blew over and messed up his hair. He raised his head and saw the cold-faced Li Daoji jump down from somewhere, causing the cable bridge to sway. Follow me? It was so simple that before Ding Ning could say anything, Li Daoji turned around and motioned for Ding Ning to follow. Sect Uncle Li Daoji. Ding Ning looked with a grimace at the half-eaten food. I have not finished eating. Some matters are far more important than eating. Li Daoji's sword hilt flashed with faint red light in the night, like a lantern in front of him. His footsteps did not stop at all, and only his cold voice floated through the night mist. Ding Ning shook his head helplessly, grabbed a rice ball, and quickly followed. The shining sword hilt swayed in the night and moved upwards. In the night mist, there was a narrow rope bridge that had not been there during the day. It stretched towards a crack in the cliff not far from the tallest Taoist temple. Strangely, there was a flat piece of land between the mountain crevices that were usually covered by white clouds. On the flat ground, there were even 3 identical straw huts. In front of the thatched hut, there were even a few vegetable fields on the flat ground. They were all planted with some leeks. This room will be your residence from now on. Li Daoji sensed that Ding Ning had also passed through the narrow bridge and stepped onto the ground. He had walked to the front of the 3 huts and turned his body slightly. He pointed at the leftmost hut and spoke to Ding Ning. You can also cultivate here on normal days. You don't have to listen to lectures like the other students. If you have any questions in the process of cultivation, you can directly ask me or Zhangyi. However, your meals will not be delivered here. They will only be delivered to the stone hall in the scripture cave. After thinking about it, Li Daoji added another sentence. He did not have to listen to lectures like the other students and could directly find Li Daoji. If other students heard this, they would be shocked and envious. This was equivalent to directly receiving Li Daoji's teachings. Right now, Li Daoji was the publicly acknowledged top expert of White Goat Cave other than the cave master, who had not shown his cultivation for many years. Hearing Li Daoji's words, Ding Ning did not have any expression of joy. He said softly and seriously, Sect Uncle Li Daoji, I want to stay at home usually. Li Daoji's thin eyebrows immediately rose. He suddenly turned around. He did not refuse or agree. He looked coldly at Ding Ning and said, "Go in and see." Ding Ning sensed the strangeness in Li Daoji's expression and tone. A hint of shock flashed through his eyes. He did not say anything else and walked towards the grass hut Li Daoji had pointed out. The roof of the grass hut was made from ordinary straw and some yellow mud. The door was the most ordinary wooden door. Yet before Ding Ning's finger touched the wooden door, his body imperceptibly shook. There was the sound of water in this grass hut. He slowly took a breath and pushed open the unlocked wooden door. The decorations of the grass hut were extremely simple. There was only a bed by the window with the simplest bedding. In front of the bed, there was a straw cushion used for meditation. The sound of water came from under the meditation mat. Sensing the unusual and fresh presence in this grass hut, Ding Ning could faintly guess the result. His heart beat faster than usual. He took another deep breath, walked forward, and moved away the thick straw meditation mat. He saw a fist-sized spring in the middle of the rocks below his praying mat. The spring water rippled as though it was boiling, and occasionally released threads of milky, white spirit energy. Each thread of spirit energy was like a small white goat horn. This was the legendary spirit vein. In the cultivation world thousands of years ago, most of the wars that occurred were due to fighting over spirit veins. Now, in the Qin dynasty and the surrounding dynasties, spirit veins were extremely rare. For those sects that possess spirit veins, only their most important disciples could use spirit veins to cultivate. Also, this spirit vein was far from the spirit vein of White Goat Cave that he had heard of. Ding Ning turned around. He looked at Li Daoji in hopes of receiving an answer. Seeing his puzzled gaze, Li Daoji misunderstood and said expressionlessly, "This is the legendary spirit vein. The spirit energy coming out of the spirit vein will enter the cultivator's body along with their breathing. It will be very beneficial, just like some pills that can increase the speed of cultivation. But even more importantly, this spirit energy is the purest product of the world. There are no impurities, and it will not have side effects like some pills." "I know." Ding Ning looked at him and shook his head. "I do not mean this. I know spirit veins are very powerful, but don't only direct disciples who have passed through many tests qualify to use spirit veins to cultivate? Otherwise, what if I become a rebellious disciple and betray my master and ancestors?" Hearing his words, a cold and disdainful expression appeared at the corners of Li Daoji's mouth. "White Goat Cave is gone. Where can you rebel?" It sounded like a hopeless situation, but at this moment, it was filled with an unruly, domineering aura and courage. Ding Ning grimaced and looked seriously at the small spirit vein and the grass meditation mat that could absorb spirit energy. He asked, "This is a spirit vein, but why is this spirit vein so different from the legendary spirit veins? Why is it so small?" Li Daoji's expression froze, and he did not respond. "Sect Uncle Li Daoji." Ding Ning was silent for a moment and then looked more seriously at him. He asked softly, "I heard that White Goat Cave merged into the Green Vine Sword Academy because we offended the Empress. How did White Goat Cave offend her? Where did you hear such words?" Li Daoji's expression suddenly changed, and a hint of murderousness flashed through his eyes. "If you want to live longer, it is best not to mention such things." Ding Ning did not feel terror. He looked calmly at Li Daoji's murderous eyes and murmured softly, "If not for offending her, even if White Goat Cave did not produce any powerful cultivators with a spirit vein, how could it merge with the Green Vine Sword Academy? Even Wang Taishu knows that you offended her, but he does not know how. Otherwise, I would not have asked you. As to whether I want to live longer, I do not have long to live." Li Daoji's gaze had grown sharper, but at his last words, Li Daoji frowned and suddenly felt his words were reasonable. The murderousness in his eyes started to dissipate. "You do not have long to live, but when I can live, I want to live for a few more years."
So, I did not say anything.
"What you heard must be an illusion," he said slowly and coldly. "She wants to plant a spirit lotus in the spirit spring of White Goat Cave. The fruit of the spirit lotus can be used to make some very useful breakthrough pills. In reality, she just wants to see our attitude because she always felt there was something wrong with our attitude. Spirit veins are rare, but with her abilities, she does not lack one. However, our sect Uncle Du Qingjiao and the cave master were not willing to agree, because that kind of spirit lotus will absorb large amounts of spirit energy from the spirit vein and cause the spirit vein to dry up. Therefore, before we sensed that she had such intentions, Martial Uncle Du Qingjiao had already divided our spirit veins into 3 small portions. This is a kind of self-destruction, but each portion of the spirit vein is not enough to maintain the growth of the spirit lotus. Ding Ning was slightly dazed. He had not expected the white-haired old man who had left White Goat Cave to make such a choice. This is not an attitude of dying in glory rather than living in dishonor. White Goat Cave does not want to offend anyone. Li Daoji looked at the pitifully small spirit vein and slowly narrowed his eyes. We only do what we think is just and right. The spirit vein is small, but it can be left behind. At least, it can be of some use to the disciples of White Goat Cave. I want to go home. Ding Ning nodded and then said seriously. Li Daoji's hand instinctively touched the hilt of his sword and almost pulled it out to cut. He did not dare to believe that a person who knew there was a spirit vein in this place and had heard so many things would tell him to go home at this time. I know you cultivate quickly, but do you feel that cultivating in a place like Falling Parasol is better than sitting on a spirit vein? His chest rose and fell as he suppressed his emotions and said coldly. Ding Ning looked seriously and innocently at him. He said, I know, but I can cultivate here during the day. I will sleep better when I return at night. Li Daoji naturally did not know what he was truly thinking. Looking at the serious Ding Ning, he turned in anger and left. Not opposing was silent agreement. Ding Ning laughed happily and shouted at the other's back, then prepare a carriage for me. When Li Daoji was about to draw his sword again, in the library cave, Nangong Kaishu had finished reading Theory of Opening Heaven. She was reading the second book, Notes of the Banana Pond Master of Ba Mountain. The more she read, the paler her face became. The owners of these 2 books must not have been powerful cultivators. The notes were messy, and many places were just guesses and temporary comprehensions during cultivation. But most of the records were descriptions of primal energies of the universe. Most importantly, the owners of these 2 books were very humble in their attitudes towards primal energies of the universe, and were very similar. The owner of Theory of Opening Heaven compared himself to an empty bottle praying to the heavens. His cultivation process was like this empty bottle praying to the heavens to bestow some primal energies of the universe into his bottle. Notes of the Banana Pond Master of Ba Mountain said that when he was comprehending the primal energies of the universe, it was raining. He happened to see the vast world outside. Countless rainwater flowed down from the surrounding world and gathered into his pond. Compared to the vast world around him, the pond in his yard, including himself, was minuscule. The water in the pond came from the gifts of the world, and not from absorption. Looking at the same thoughts in these 2 different books, Nangong Kaishu was even more shocked. She started to feel that her and her father's attitudes towards the primal energies of the universe were wrong. It was not that her perception was not enough, or that her analysis of the primal energies of the universe was not detailed and thorough enough, but that her attitude was too forceful from the start. She wanted to forcefully pull the primal energies of the universe into her body, but she was minuscule compared to the primal energies of the universe. So, only by admitting her insignificance, by opening up her body and letting the primal energies of the universe be interested in this new vessel, would they tentatively enter? Thousands of streams into water, a pond on a rainy night appeared in Nangong Tsaishu's mind. Countless droplets of water fell from the world, landing on the grass by the pond and the banana leaves by the pond. Then they gathered into small streams of water and slowly flowed into the pond that did not have the ability to absorb water. Her heart started to beat violently, and her eyes shone like stars. Chapter 41. Falling Parasol was very quiet. Occasionally, the barks of dogs echoed in the doorway in the autumn night. Ding Ning pushed open the wooden door of the wine shop and walked into the unlit wine shop. The furnishings of the wine shop were the same as usual. But Ding Ning's brow quickly furrowed deeply, and he felt a hint of coldness. Previously, when he and Zhongsun Qianxue had been talking here and cultivating here, they had not been on guard at all. That was because he knew that in Chongling, other than a rare few people, no one could escape Zhongsun Qianxue's perception when they walked into this alley. If those people really entered this alley, then there was no difference whether they were on guard or not. Now, Zhongsun Qianxue had not come out of the rear courtyard. He could not sense any presence of Zhongsun Qianxue. Zhongsun Qianxue was not in the wine shop. The reason he had to come back was because he feared something would happen to Zhongsun Qianxue. In the past many years, he and Zhongsun Qianxue had gotten used to their own existences. Zhongsun Qianxue's cultivation was enough to kill countless of him in an instant. But this was Chongling. Even a most powerful cultivator had countless possibilities of being killed. She was like a blank piece of paper on how to live in Chongling and how to walk in Chongling. Ding Ning lifted the curtain to the rear courtyard. His heart grew colder. Zhongsun Qianxue was not in the rear courtyard. Where did she go? Ding Ning stood motionlessly in the center of the rear courtyard. After dozens of breaths, he silently walked into the kitchen at the side and started to cook noodles. When the water started to boil and he put the noodles in, Ding Ning saw his hands tremble slightly. He could not see his face at this time, but he was certain that even under the warm light of the fire, his face was pale. He knew that in Chongling at this time, he had weaknesses. Zhongsun Qianxue was his greatest weakness. Nothing could happen to her. So he lit the fire. He hoped that in the dark night, Zhongsun Qianxue could see the sparks coming out of the chimney and understand that he had returned. The snowy white noodles gradually floated up in the boiling water. He did not add any seasoning. He scooped the noodles into his special bowl and started to eat. While he ate noodles with thick soup and red sauce every morning at the door of the shop, this kind of clear water without any seasoning was the taste he was most used to. The broth was hot, but hearing the wind in the surrounding streets, his heart grew colder. If Zhongsun Qianxue left now, how much time would he have to spend before he could appear by her side again? In the white steam rising from the noodle bowl, his face looked so young, but it was filled with endless sorrow. Suddenly, the steam rising from the noodle bowl became slightly distorted. Ding Ning suddenly looked up. At this time, Zhongsun Qianxue seemed to appear out of thin air in front of him. You? Ding Ning stood up. Instinctively, he thought that he would not be able to resist cursing. But when he saw her calm and cold eyes, his heart softened. He said hoarsely, "Where did you go?" Zhongsun Qianxue frowned slightly. She could see the concern in Ding Ning's eyes for her. But other than that, she did not like other emotions. Ding Ning took a deep breath and quickly calmed down. He looked at her and said, "You promised me that you would not. Just an accident?" Before he finished speaking, Zhongsun Qianxue interrupted him. She glanced at him and said, "You said that Cloudwater Palace's people may have obtained important clues to the Lonely Mountain Soar Horde." Ding Ning's body suddenly tensed, and he was nervous. "You found Cloudwater Palace's people?" Zhongsun Qianxue said coolly. "Should be." Ding Ning grew even more nervous and asked, "Did you fight?" Zhongsun Qianxue said, "I just remembered that person's presence and characteristics." Ding Ning immediately breathed a sigh of relief, and his tense body also relaxed. In the vast lands of each dynasty, there would always be some extraordinary sects and extraordinary people. The Wei dynasty's Cloudwater Palace was still remembered by every Qin person more than a decade after the Wei dynasty was destroyed. This was a sect that could not be described as rising. While they did not have so many terrifying grandmasters like the Zhao Sword Furnace, Cloudwater Palace had a mysterious and powerful Bai Shanshui. At least, the cultivators of the various dynasties were certain that Bai Shanshui of Cloudwater Palace had passed Realm 6 when the Wei dynasty was destroyed and had officially entered Realm 7. More than a decade had passed. No one had heard of Bai Shanshui slaughtering an entire city with one blow like the disciples of the Zhao Sword Furnace, but everyone knew that he was still alive. To be able to survive the pursuit of countless Qin dynasty armies and cultivators meant that he was stronger than before. Bai Shanshui was not an enemy that he and Zhongsun Qianxue could face right now. Do not worry about this matter. I will investigate. Ding Ning was silent for a moment. He drank all the remaining broth in the bowl. As he washed the bowl, he looked at Zhongsun Qianxue and said gravely, "Also, this matter concerns the Lonely Mountain Sword Horde. The Astrology Bureau and Divinity Bureau will use all their power to investigate the people of Cloudwater Palace. Before Bai Shanshui appears, the best thing we can do is to silently watch this matter develop. Otherwise, we will be dragged into the water and will not benefit. I will tell you the characteristics of that person." Zhongsun Qianxue thought for a moment and nodded in agreement to Ding Ning's words. Then she turned and walked towards the bedroom. "I will wait for you on the bed." These unusually ambiguous words were still unusually cold from her mouth, and even carried an unsurpassable murderousness. But looking at her back, Ding Ning's body started to warm up. The night in the mountains was as cold as water. On a slope not far from White Goat Gorge, there was a cluster of green halls. The palace itself was built with gray mountain rocks, but because the outer walls were entwined with very old green vines, it appeared green in the dark night. In the deepest part of the palace, there was a palace covered with countless sword marks under the green vines. A gorgeous blanket made of the best wool made the entire palace appear warm even in the thick autumn air. A slender old man with white hair coiled up with a green jade hairpin looked extremely clean. Even his fingernails were neatly trimmed. His eyebrows were slightly green, his eyes slightly sunken. His expression was calm, but still dignified. He was the principal of Green Vine Sword Academy, Di Qingmei. At this moment, he was staring coldly at a memo in his hand. A cold and disdainful smile slowly appeared at the corners of his mouth. White Goat Cave Shui Wangshu and Du Qingjiao, these two old fools, have always been stubborn. Even after seeing so many bloody things in the first year of Yuanwu, they did not repent. Now that they belong to our Green Vine Sword Academy, Shui Wangshu, this old fool, actually thought of such a move. He said that since the two sects have merged into one, the Green Vine Sword Academy disciples and White Goat Cave disciples are no different. Then White Goat Cave disciples can attend our sword trial festival, and now he wants our green suet jade. Sitting across from Di Qingmei was a middle-aged man in green robes with two swords on his back. This middle-aged man in green robes was his only direct disciple up until now, Duanmu Lian. Hearing the dignified old man's cold laugh, Duanmu Lian frowned slightly and said gravely, "Then, Master, will you agree to his request?"
Of course I will agree.
The dignified old man said disdainfully, "If I do not agree to his request, how can I trap him and seek his spirit vein?" Spirit vein? A strange light flashed through Duanmu Lian's eyes. Du Qingjiao and Shui Wangshu, these two old fools, before the Empress expressed her intentions, they had already split the White Goat Cave spirit vein into 3 strands. But they think they can keep their spirit vein like this? Di Qingmei sneered. The Empress finally found their mistakes elsewhere and gave White Goat Cave to us. If we let them keep the 3 spirit veins, how can the Empress be satisfied with us? Shui Wangshu wants to leave the 3 spirit veins for White Goat Cave to use. We cannot let him do as he wishes. Di Qingmei looked at Duanmu Lian in front of him and said slowly, "Go, and reply to Shui Wangshu for me. Tell him I agree to his request, but these 3 spirit springs will be shared by the Green Vine Sword Academy and White Goat Cave. Only those who qualify can use them. So when the time comes, they will be used as a reward for the sword trial festival to the victors." Duanmu Lian thought for a moment and said, "Master, of all the students of White Goat Cave, Zhang Yi and Su Qin cannot be underestimated. In terms of age and time of entry, they meet the requirements to participate in the sword trial festival. Since you fear our sect disciples cannot defeat them, then think of a way to turn them into our people." Di Qingmei glanced at him and said slowly, "I heard that Zhang Yi is more polite and pedantic, but Su Qin is a talent and has always been at odds with Zhang Yi." Duanmu Lian's eyes lit up slightly. He stood up and bowed seriously to this dignified old man who controlled the Green Vine Sword Academy. He said, "This disciple understands." Chapter 42. On the same night, in the library cave of White Goat Cave, Nangong Kaishu closed the 2 books of notes she had read multiple times. Then she took deep breaths. After almost 100 breaths, she finally calmed down and closed her eyes. Based on her usual cultivation method, she entered meditation, and then her mental power slowly spread out of her body. But unlike usual, she was not in a hurry to use her mental power to capture the primal energies of the universe in the surroundings. She allowed her mental power to float in the quiet library cave. Her cultivation was limited. Her mental power could only cover the entire inner cave and could not even reach the periphery of the library cave. Compared to the surrounding world, the area her mental power could reach was like a pitifully small pond. But when she thought of that possibility, she did not feel any impatience. She maintained this state and waited calmly and patiently. As time passed, many minuscule water particles appeared in her perception. There were also minuscule dust, and even the hairs of plants and animals so small they could not be detected. These minuscule things silently entered the world of her mental power, fell into the pond around her, and broke the absolute calm. Around the pond, there was a sudden breeze. Countless wisps of wind blew across the pond. These breezes seemed to be alive. Most of them seemed to instinctively resist the pond. When they came into contact with the pond, they silently passed by and only caused some ripples. Some seemed to be probing and started to truly come into contact with the surface of the pond. Nangong Kaishu started to feel true shock. But she still did not do anything. She was like a pond on a rainy night, calmly accepting the water that flowed over from all directions. The breezes could not truly enter the pond, but she started to see different colors. She began to see that there were many colors in the breeze, like tiny stars. She finally could not control her emotions. She was so excited she could not control herself. Her body trembled violently as she breathed heavily. She could not maintain her meditation and could not continue to cultivate. She opened her eyes. She had not succeeded in one go and could not guide the primal energies of the universe into her body. But she felt an important change. She understood the true meaning of this place. Acceptance and tolerance were much more useful than taking by force. Several Green Vine Sword Academy students not far from her were still frowning and deep in thought. They were immersed in the books they had chosen, so they didn't notice her at all. With an almost pious attitude, she returned the 2 notebooks in front of her to their original positions. Then she walked out of the inner cave, out of the outer cave, all the way to the stone hall outside the library cave. It was still dark outside, and there was still some time before dawn. However, she sat down in the stone hall, facing the rope bridge as she waited. She didn't know why, but she really wanted to see Ding Ning again. Sitting at the top of White Goat Gorge, waiting for the sun to rise, and looking down at White Goat Cave and the gradual changes in White Goat Cave, she was the first student of Green Vine Sword School to have such an experience. All kinds of sounds appeared in the absolutely silent White Goat Gorge. Before the sky brightened, many White Goat Cave students appeared on the mountain paths of White Goat Gorge. The cultivation of a cultivator was all about the integration of body, technique, and technique. Technique referred to the cultivation of vital energy, but it could only absorb primal energies of the universe and refine vital energy. It could only become a pure vessel. Body referred to the cultivation of the cultivator's body. The body of a cultivator had to be strong, able to live for a long time, have strength, agility, speed, and enough reaction time. Technique referred to the techniques of using the body, vital energy, and weapons. The combination of body, technique, and technique was the true power of a cultivator. Based on the practices of cultivators, everything was quiet at night, and the body needed to rest. It was the best time to cultivate vital energy. After sunrise, everything would be active, the temperature would rise, and the flow of blood would become vigorous. It was the best time to train the body and technique. So, under the faint light of the day, some White Goat Cave students were climbing the steep cliffs with weights. Some were breathing heavily at the edge of the cliffs, using breathing methods to strengthen their organs. Some were flying around with cold light as they worked hard to cultivate their swordsmanship. This was a beautiful scene of prosperity. Even Nangong Kaishu, who was waiting for Ding Ning, could not help but have such a scene appear in her mind. All of Chongling, all of the Qin dynasty, was waking up. Countless sects like this were all like this. The prosperity of countless sects like this represented the prosperity of the Qin dynasty. Yet, what she did not know was a debate was starting on a mountain path in White Goat Cave.
Why?
Su Qin looked coldly at a young White Goat Cave teacher in front of him. I have no objections if Zhang Yi qualifies to enter the White Goat Grass Hut to cultivate, but what qualifications does Ding Ning, who just entered the sect a day ago, have? This young teacher of White Goat Cave was very dissatisfied with Su Qin's attitude. But facing Su Qin, who was only his student but had vital energy cultivation similar to his, he knew that Su Qin's future accomplishments could not be compared to his. So, he suppressed his displeasure and tried to say pleasantly, "This is Cave Master's decision. Since Cave Master has decided to do this, he must have his reasons." Ding Ning's test outside the sect was astounding enough. After saying this, he saw Su Qin's expression grow uglier. The young teacher helplessly said in a voice only the two of them could hear, "I am only responsible for passing on the message. Also, Cave Master has put you among the three. You already qualify to use the spirit vein to cultivate. Why do you have to care who the other two are? You can only use one spirit vein." This young teacher felt that he had spoken reasonably and even put himself in the position of a lowly person. Yet, unexpectedly, Su Qin's expression grew even colder. "This is not a matter of how many spirit veins I can use, but a matter of fairness. You should know that using the spirit vein to cultivate is the highest reward of White Goat Cave. If it is casually given to a new disciple, then who in the sect will truly work for the sect in the future?" His voice was not loud, but cold and clear. It spread far on the mountain path into the ears of many White Goat Cave disciples who were working hard on cultivation. The young teacher's expression gradually changed. He started to understand why Su Qin had been showing off more and more recently, and his performance in the sect had grown stronger. Because White Goat Cave had joined the Green Vine Sword Academy. Because White Goat Cave's previous existence was not recognized by the Empress and the dynasty. If he could have the majority of White Goat Cave stand behind him, then he could become the master of White Goat Cave in the future and easily climb to a higher stage in Chongling. "Your ambition came too quickly and too early," the young teacher scolded in a low voice with an ugly expression. Su Qin smiled coldly. He glanced at the increasing number of White Goat Cave students gathered around him out of the corner of his eyes. His voice was very low. "I heard that people must have ambition to live. I also heard that carps need to use power to jump over the Dragon Gate. I also heard that if a person wants to become famous, they have to do it early." The young teacher's expression grew uglier. Yet when he saw more and more angry eyes waiting for an answer, he panicked slightly and did not know what to do. The cave master made such an arrangement because he has sufficient qualifications. At this moment, a cold and emotionless voice sounded from behind the young instructor. Everyone's gaze gathered on Li Daoji, who walked out of the thin mist. Li Daoji's sword hilt in front of him still gave off a faint red light that shook people's souls. The hundreds of White Goat Cave students gathered nearby stilled slightly. But there was a terrifying presence in the silence that could explode at any moment. Su Qin smiled slightly. He felt that no matter the result today, he would gain more prestige. What qualifications? He looked disdainfully at the sword hilt in front of Li Daoji's chest. He thought inside, "Even if you are stronger than me now, I will definitely surpass you in the near future." Ding Ning has reached profound understanding. A rare smile appeared on Li Daoji's face. It was a strange smile filled with cold mockery. He looked at Su Qin, whose expression had stiffened, and added, "Ding Ning entered the sect yesterday, reached profound understanding yesterday. He reached profound understanding in half a day.
What?
Cries of disbelief rang out in the mountains. Su Qin's face paled. He did not speak, but these exclamations replaced the disbelief in his heart. Everyone, like the Green Vine Sword Academy students in the library cave, could not believe this was true. In their memories, only 1 or 2 people in Chongling could reach profound understanding in half a day when they started to cultivate. The young teacher's body started to tremble. He knew that after Li Daoji came out, this matter would not be his to resolve. Yet he had not expected to hear such news. A monster who reached profound understanding in half a day. If a monster like this did not qualify to cultivate with the help of a spirit vein, then who in White Goat Cave qualified? Is this true? A young voice sounded. The person who spoke was Shenbai. He had been the one who had been the most vehement in opposition to Ding Ning's entry. Now, a flame of hope started to burn in his shocked eyes. If this was true, if White Goat Cave really had a monster like this that could grow, would White Goat Cave be as humiliated as it was now in the future? Li Daoji glanced at him. He did not answer Shenbai's question, and slowly said in a cold and disdainful tone, "There is no meaning in discussing qualifications now." Yesterday, Principal Di Qingmei of Green Vine Sword Academy announced that the students of White Goat Cave will participate in the Sword Trial Festival. If they win in the end, they will receive the same rewards as the students of Green Vine Sword Academy. But the 3 spirit springs of White Goat Cave will be the reward for the winner.
What?
Suppressed gasps sounded again on the mountain path. Li Daoji coldly swept across everyone present. Cave Master has agreed, so if you feel resentment, if you feel that White Goat Cave has lost something and want to take it back, then take it back with your own sword. Chapter 43. Profound Understanding in Half a Day. This was more shocking news than a student of White Goat Cave being able to attend the Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival. Also, this kind of shock was not limited to White Goat Cave. Yet Ding Ning's figure that caused the shock waited until late in the morning before he appeared on the mountain path of White Goat Cave. Is this a joke? On the mountain path not far from the library cave, Ding Ning looked at the expressionless Li Daoji and said with a frown, "Yesterday, you told me I could use that spirit vein to cultivate. Just one night later, you tell me that spirit vein belongs to the winner of the Sword Trial Festival. Isn't this change too fast?" Li Daoji looked coldly at Ding Ning and said, "There is still a month before the Sword Trial Festival. This spirit vein still belongs to you. If you think the change is too fast, you should have listened to me yesterday and used the time to cultivate using the spirit vein. You should not have stayed in Falling Parasol and spent so much time on the road." Ding Ning looked at Li Daoji, whose eyes were filled with discontent, and said, "I was not idle on the way back. I studied the Wildfire Sword Manual." Li Daoji said disdainfully, "In such a short time, you memorized some of the contents of the Wildfire Sword Manual?" Ding Ning nodded. A hint of anger flashed through Li Daoji's eyes, but he did not immediately say anything. He broke off a branch from the mountain wall beside him and held it in front of Ding Ning. Then he motioned for Ding Ning to go over to a platform less than 10 feet wide. "Since this is the case, why don't you practice for me to see?"
All right.
Ding Ning did not refuse. Holding the small branch, he stepped onto the platform and started to wave it. The small branch in his hand looked laughable, with some young leaves at the tip. Li Daoji purposely made him look ridiculous, so he didn't even cut off those young leaves. Arrogance was taboo in cultivation. The Wildfire Sword Manual was more complex than most of the sword manuals of White Goat Cave. Many sword moves were made from many sword moves connected together. One sword move had many variations. Even if he studied the Wildfire Sword Manual himself, he could not remember so much in a short day and comprehend it. However, the moment Ding Ning raised his hand, a bolt of lightning flashed through his eyes that were filled with ridicule, and his face instantly froze. The seemingly ridiculous twig suddenly formed a semicircle in front of Ding Ning. In the next moment, the air was filled with the sound of something breaking through the air. The twigs transformed into countless tiny sword shadows, enveloping the area a few feet in front of Ding Ning. The sword shadows were dense, and most of them were concentrated below Ding Ning's waist, as if a dense grassland had suddenly appeared on the ground in front of him. The shock in Li Daoji's eyes grew, and his eyebrows twitched. He had never read the Wildfire Sword Manual, but he could see that this was the starting sword move of the Wildfire Sword Manual. While Ding Ning's sword move had many flaws in his eyes, he could feel the true sword essence. It was just a sword move, but he felt like a wildfire was about to rise from the grassland. This was the essence. The sword move was not perfect, and the position of the sword in the air was slightly off at every moment. This could be improved through practice, but the essence of sword essence could not be comprehended through simple practice. He was the best swordsman in White Goat Cave other than Cave Master Shui Wangshu. So he knew that only swordsmen who had the essence could express the true power of the sword. In battle, they would naturally have the sword follow the sword essence and appear where it should appear. At this moment, what shocked him the most was that even the few ridiculous leaves on the branch seemed to have a unique charm. It gave him a strange feeling, completely different from the wild fire in the prairie. It was thriving, and there was a lingering sword intent. Maybe I should acknowledge your cultivation method. But starting today, if you want to leave the mountain, I will arrange a faster carriage for you. He took a deep breath, looked at Ding Ning, who had stopped, and said this. Then he turned and left without saying anything else. Thank you, sect Uncle Li Daoji. Looking at Li Daoji's back, Ding Ning thanked him seriously. There was no pride in his eyes, but a hint of inexplicable coldness. Yesterday, his cultivation in White Goat Cave had been very smooth. But now, everything did not appear to be as smooth as he had imagined. Di Qingmei of the Green Vine Sword Academy was at odds with Shui Wangshu and Du Qingjiao, as the rumors said. In order to satisfy the Empress in the Imperial Palace and let her see his attitude, he had to do more. Actually, usually, no matter how you fight with White Goat Cave, I will not interfere. I have an entire wall. I do not have the ability to manage matters here. But now, this matter concerns my cultivation. You gave me the spirit vein yesterday, and just last night, you want to take it away from me. I am very unhappy. Ding Ning threw down the twig in his hand and looked in the direction of the Green Vine Sword Academy. He said softly and seriously inside. At this moment, he was really unhappy. He was unhappy because of the more incidents, unhappy because of the distant names that had appeared in his mind recently. Ding Ning. At this time, he heard someone call him. Nangong Kaishu ran towards him under the sunlight. She looked at Ding Ning, who was standing on the platform and looking into the distance. Her body trembled slightly. She ran in front of Ding Ning and said in a trembling voice, Ding Ning, you really are a great monster. Ding Ning gathered his thoughts. He looked at her excited expression that was completely different from when she looked at him. He knew that this young woman had definitely gained a lot in her comprehension of the primal energies of the universe. So he asked calmly, are those 2 books useful? I do not know why you feel those 2 books are useful, but they are useful to me. Nangong Kaishu still could not calm down. She said in a trembling voice, I will quickly reach Realm 2. Ding Ning said softly, it is best if I can help you. You spoke for me at the mountain gates. This way, I will not owe you anything. Nangong Kaishu stilled. Her eyes were filled with incomprehension and even a hint of anger. How is this the same thing? She looked straight into Ding Ning's eyes, her face flushing slightly. What do you mean you do not owe me anything? I spoke a few words for you on the mountain path. How can it compare to this? This kind of cultivation matter, your help might have saved me 7 years of time, or even more than that. Ding Ning looked at the excited her, frowned slightly, and was silent for a moment. Maybe you feel that you are a disciple of White Goat Cave and are naturally distant from me, a student of Green Vine Sword Academy. But I will not care about these matters. Even if you do not think of me as a friend now, I must thank you. Nangong Saishu's expression grew even more serious. She even bowed seriously to Ding Ning. You have told me about your body. I know your cultivation is more urgent than ordinary people. So I hope that if you need any help, you will tell me. Ding Ning's brows furrowed even tighter. He thought and said, If you really want to help me, then promise me that you will not tell anyone that the 2 books I helped you pick out helped you, including your teacher and your father. Nangong Kaishu stilled. She looked in puzzlement at Ding Ning and asked, "Why? If one's cultivation advances quickly, I fear that it will cause unnecessary trouble." Ding Ning said calmly, "If a person who advances quickly is thought to have strong intuition and comprehension of cultivation records, then it will be even more troublesome. You know that I do not have much time. I do not have time to be used by others. For me, I need to spend all my time on my cultivation advancement." Nangong Kaishu did not know what Ding Ning was truly thinking, but she felt that Ding Ning's words were correct. She knew that those geniuses who were called freaks would face more challenges and worldly chores after their talents were revealed. Those people's future pursuits would mostly be higher positions in Chongling. Those challenges and chores would help them reach higher positions in the future. They also had enough time to manage these things, but Ding Ning did not. "I promise you, I swear I will not tell anyone that the 2 books you picked helped me. I will find another reason." Nangong Kaishu nodded seriously. Then she stubbornly raised her head and looked at Ding Ning. "But this is not enough. Is there anything else I can help you with?" Looking at this young woman who wanted to help him, Ding Ning felt a headache, but he still thought carefully. "Is there a pill medicine that can increase cultivation?" He thought for a moment and said. Then he felt that he was slightly shameless. Nangong Kaishu stilled. If it were someone else who said this, she would definitely feel that it was shameless. Even if pills that increased cultivation had some long-term negative effects, and in the legends, would have a greater effect on the breakthroughs of cultivators after Realm 7 because they could quickly change a cultivator's body, increase their cultivation, and even save time on breakthroughs. Any pill medicine related to increasing cultivation was the most precious treasure in the world. A pill medicine like this was a great treasure for a cultivator of Nangong Saishu's background. Usually when they obtained a pill medicine like this, they would use it themselves and not give it to others. But Ding Ning's body did not cause Nangong Kaishu to have the thought of being shameless. She naturally felt that this could help Ding Ning cultivate faster and save some of his lifespan. "I will think of a way and do my best." After a moment of shock, she solemnly patted her chest and promised. "Thank you." A strange feeling rose in Ding Ning's eyes. He thanked her seriously and then said softly, "Then can you please tell me about your Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival? What is it like?" Chapter 44. Nangong Kaishu was slightly surprised. She looked in shock at Ding Ning and asked, "Why did you suddenly think of asking about our Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festivals?" Ding Ning asked in response, "You should know of White Goat Cave's Spirit Vein?" Nangong Kaishu nodded in even more puzzlement. Ding Ning said, "Yesterday, the cave master allowed me to use the Spirit Vein to cultivate. But after one night, the situation changed. The principal of Green Vine Sword Academy, Di Qingmei, allowed our White Goat Cave disciples to participate in your Sword Trial Festival. The 3 victors of the Sword Trial Festival will receive the reward of using the Spirit Vein to cultivate." Nangong Saishu's expression suddenly grew ugly. She was a young girl with a strong sense of justice. So while she was a student of Green Vine Sword Academy, she had always felt some sympathy for White Goat Cave's situation. In her view, it was nothing to be able to enter White Goat Cave's library cave to study. In the future, White Goat Cave's disciples would definitely be able to enter the Green Vine Sword Academy's library hall to study. But Green Vine Sword Academy's most valuable possession was the White Goat Cave Spirit Vein. Now, Green Vine Sword Academy wanted to give out White Goat Cave's Spirit Vein as a reward. But the Academy would not give out their most valuable Green Vine Wooden Sword as a reward. The reward for the Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival was Green Suet Jade. This item was valuable, but it was not on the same level as White Goat Cave's Spirit Vein. This was full of the meaning of seizing by force. The Sword Trial Festival was originally our Green Vine Sword Academy. She bowed her head with an ugly expression. She had started to explain what the Sword Trial Festival was, but at this time, she suddenly understood some of the meaning in Ding Ning's words. She immediately raised her head and looked in shock at Ding Ning. "You want to participate in the sword trial festival and win?" Ding Ning looked at her shocked eyes and said calmly, "I have this idea." From your expression, this sword trial festival seems very difficult? Very difficult. Because she was sure that Ding Ning was a monstrous genius, Nangong Saishu's shock started to disappear. She frowned and thought about this possibility as she explained softly, "Because our Green Vine Sword Academy's original reward is green suet jade." Ding Ning was stunned. "Green suet jade?" Nangong Kaishu nodded and said, "I don't know if you have heard, but green suet jade is the amber formed from the juice of the green suet vine unique to our Green Vine Sword Academy. When our Green Vine Sword Academy was founded, we discovered some of this amber. At the same time, we discovered the unique uses of this amber. This amber is very useful for us cultivators when we break through from the third realm of true energy realm to the fourth realm of energy fusion realm. It allows our true energy to fuse with more primal energies of the universe." A mocking expression appeared on Ding Ning's face. He couldn't help but say softly, "I didn't think that the prize for the Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival would be green suet jade." He actually knew the effects of green suet jade very well. In reality, this kind of jade was not just unique to the Green Vine Sword Academy, as Nangong Kaishu said. At least, he knew that 2 sects of the former Wei dynasty and 1 sect of the present Chu dynasty had this kind of treasure. Also, he knew that other than being of good use when breaking through from Realm 3 to Realm 4, this kind of jade could allow cultivators to better accept some life bond items when they reached Realm 6, Life Bond Realm. Because of this treasure, they might be able to accept some life bond items that could not be accepted before. He was not an ordinary cultivator, so the green suet jade had more meaning to him. So in this sword trial festival, he had even more reasons to win. Treasures like this are rare, to begin with. Even now, there are even fewer green suet jade in the Green Vine Sword Academy's treasury. So in our Green Vine Sword Academy, this kind of treasure must be given to the most outstanding students. Nangong Kaishu did not know what Ding Ning was thinking. She looked at Ding Ning and said seriously, "So the rules of our sword trial festival are that all students who have been in the academy for less than 10 years can participate." Ding Ning did not speak and indicated for her to continue. "This is a true test of strength. The location of the trial is the Sword Trial Valley in the back mountains of Green Vine Academy. That valley is very long and narrow, and we have set up a unique vine formation. It is hard to find a way through, and some of the vines will attack on their own. All the participating students will enter from the back mountains of Green Vine Academy, and then the green suet jade as a reward will be placed at the other end of the valley. The first to pass through the entire Sword Trial Valley and obtain the green suet jade will be the winner." Nangong Kaishu said carefully, "It is forbidden to travel in groups of more than 2 in the valley. You are only allowed to move alone. If you encounter each other, you can either fight to determine victory or flee. But there is a limit of 3 days to pass through the Sword Trial Valley. Each day, there is an area that you must reach in half a day. Then you have to stay in that area for half a day. Those who cannot reach will be eliminated. Because you have to stay in that area for half a day, according to past practice, there will be many battles." Ding Ning sneered. "This is human nature. They're always afraid that some opponents will have accidents at the end, so they always want to get rid of them early. You should understand that the key is that disciples who have been in the sect for 10 years can participate in the trial. Some people's strength is much greater than others, so they naturally want to place victory in a duel, and not in who runs faster." Nangong Kaishu said with a heavy heart, "Even if the formation in the Sword Trial Valley changes the primal energies of the universe, so cultivators above Realm 3 cannot replenish their vital energy after they use it up. They can only fight with Realm 2 cultivation. But the vital energy they have at the start will allow them to defeat many people. Also, their combat experience and understanding of swordsmanship will be much stronger than others." Ding Ning was slightly surprised. He looked seriously at Nangong Kaishu and said, "So there is a limit to cultivation?" Physical energy cannot merge with primal energies of the universe, so it can only remain as physical energy. But it will only face such a situation after the vital energy in the body is used up. Nangong Kaishu hesitated and then looked sincerely at Ding Ning. Even energy refinement realm cultivators are far from you in terms of power. While you are at profound understanding and have opened your energy sea, it can only make your body stronger. You saw my battle with Li Lingjuan's retainer at Falling Parasol. You should know that a sword containing physical energy can easily send you flying. I still have time. Ding Ning smiled slightly. Nangong Saishu's words gave him more confidence. He glanced at the white clouds above the library cave and said softly, "While your principal Di Qingmei gave the 3 spirit veins as a reward for the sword trial festival, before that, one of them still belongs to me. I can still use it to cultivate." Nangong Kaishu sank into inexplicable shock again. Her voice trembled. Breaking through to Realm 1 in a month. It seems that only the 2 monsters of Lingshu Sword Gate and Min Mountain Sword Sect have done it. You did not directly say that I cannot do it. This means that you think I can do it. Ding Ning smiled, and his smile grew brighter. As long as someone has done it, it means it is possible. Nangong Kaishu looked dazedly at him. Many breaths later, she said softly and sincerely, "I hope you can succeed. However, your time is tight. You have to pay attention to your sword manual. If you feel it is necessary, you can find me to refine the sword. I can give you some combat experience. Also, Su Qin of White Goat Cave is a powerful swordsman. From the looks of it, if he encounters you in the trial, he will not hold back. You have to be careful of him. As to Green Vine Sword Academy, you have to be most careful of He Zhaoxi." After a pause, Nangong Kaishu looked at Ding Ning and said, "He Zhaoxi's father, He Wendao, is an expert under Minister Yan. He Zhaoxi and I entered the sect at the same time, but he is already Realm 3 second class. He did not enter a better sect because Principal Di Qingmei asked him to join Green Vine Sword Sect because his body is suited to the strongest method of Green Vine Sword Sect, the thriving withering art. Even our Principal Di Qingmei does not cultivate the thriving withering art. In the past 100 years, only one of our principal's sect uncles has cultivated this method. His sect uncle is the only Grandmaster in the Green Vine Sword Academy to reach Realm 7 second class in the past 100 years. Nangong Kaishu was still not reassured after saying this. She added worriedly, "So almost no one knows the uniqueness of this method. I also heard that this method is difficult to cultivate and progress is much slower than ordinary methods. So, He Zhaoxi most likely has more cultivation than this." Ding Ning thought for a moment and felt that he had learned most of what he wanted to know. Therefore, he seriously asked the last question he wanted to know. "Can I kill people in the trial?" Nangong Kaishu glanced at him and said, "This is what I am most worried about in principle. It is not allowed, but there will be times when mistakes are made. Also, the sect uncles and the others may not be able to stop or save in time." Ding Ning grew silent. He had to get the green suet jade, but he did not know how dangerous it was. Chapter 45. Ding Ning walked across the rope bridge swaying in the wind towards the 3 grass huts hidden in the cracks of the mountain. Before killing Song Shinshu, he had once said to Zhongsun Qianxue, "There is no difference below Realm 4. Yet even if he could surpass his realm and win, he feared he would have to pay a great price. Today was a good day. Looking in the direction of Chongling, the sky was unspeakably clear. Looking back at Chongling on the way here, the entire city seemed to be peaceful and without conflict. Yet under this seeming peace, there were countless schemes and fights without blood. Just like the primal energies of the universe, they were tangled together in chaotic lines. If one entered such a situation, even the smallest pawn would not be able to escape. They would be caught in countless nets and could not be free. This was why, in his plan, he had to reach Realm 3 Vital Energy Realm to show some special traits before he could enter the sect that qualified to participate in the Min Mountain Sword Sect exam. Even though he cultivated the strongest 9 death silkworms in the world, he was like the young silkworms under the mulberry leaves in the silkworm chapter. He was too weak and could not even be exposed under the sun. In his plan, he needed more patience. Yet Zhang Sun Qianxue was right. After killing Song Shinshu and obtaining so much information from Song Shinshu, he felt uneasy. Since he had taken the first step, he had no choice. He could not think of the dangers and difficulties. He could only attend to the matters in front of him. He silently clenched his fists and then relaxed. He calmed himself down. He walked across the rope bridge, pushed open the wooden door of the leftmost grass hut, and sat on the special meditation mat. He closed his eyes, and threads of spiritual energy that he hadn't felt for a long time slowly seeped into his body through the praying mat beneath him. He entered inner vision at a speed ordinary cultivators could not comprehend. The energies in his body slowly flowed into his energy sea under the control of his mental power. Deep below his energy sea, there was a crystal-clear space like a palace made from jade at the bottom of the sea. This was the Jade Palace that cultivators spoke of. As long as one could sink the 5 qi into the Jade Palace, one would have reached the middle class of the common mysterious realm. For Ding Ning, as long as he was willing, he could still sink his 5 qis into the Jade Palace in half a day and break through to the middle class of the first realm. Because his Jade Palace already existed, he didn't need to sense it again. What he needed to do was to follow the flow of the 5 qi in the Severing 3 Corpses Selfless Self-Origin Sutra and slowly let the 5 qi that had been transformed by this cultivation method slowly seep into his sea of qi and Jade Palace, allowing his sea of qi and Jade Palace to undergo a certain degree of transformation. But if it was too fast, it would be too shocking. So when he talked to Nangong Kaishu, he decided to use a month to go from Realm 1 to Realm 2. He took a deep breath. Changes suddenly occurred in his originally calm body. It was as if countless tiny silkworms had suddenly appeared in his body and began to gulp down the spiritual energy that had seeped into his body. In just an instant, his body seemed to have turned into extremely dry land. He carefully controlled it. He did not allow his body to give off the sounds of thousands of silkworms chewing. Under his control, a small portion of the spirit energy was not swallowed by the silkworms and slowly merged into his 5 energies. Li Daoji's figure appeared at the door of this grass hut. He stood coldly and let his perception pass through the thin door to land around Ding Ning. Ding Ning had intentionally slowed down his cultivation advancement. Even so, when his energies sank into his energy sea, the vibrations that occasionally came out caused Li Daoji's brows to tremble slightly. Thinking of the sword essence that the laughable branch had shown, his eyes flashed with even more unusual light. He turned and walked towards the gates of White Goat Cave. There was a carriage waiting outside the gates of White Goat Cave, a carriage that could run very fast. Li Daoji's sword was very long. When he entered the carriage, he held the sword in his hand and then held it horizontally in front of him. The sword hilt gave off a faint red light in front of him. He leaned against the cushions of the carriage, his eyes closed as though he was asleep. The carriage sped on the road towards a place Ding Ning was very familiar with, the fish market to the east of the city. The carriage finally stopped at an entrance to the fish market. Li Daoji silently got off the carriage and slowly walked into the fish market. While the weather was good, under the cover of the layers of roofs, most of the places in the fish market were still dark and damp. The lanterns burned like willow wisps. Li Daoji was unfamiliar with the roads of the fish market. After walking slowly for an hour in the dark and damp streets, and even asking multiple shopkeepers, he finally reached the bottom of the fish market. He walked into a stilted building without any sign or lights. Li Daoji's eyes had completely adjusted to the darkness. When he walked into the building and saw the man with loose hair sitting on the couch, he knew he had not found the wrong place, and this person was living well in the fish market. "I want to buy a sword." Li Daoji looked at the man's shining eyes in the darkness and said, "I remember you have a remnant sword here." The man with loose hair looked coldly at Li Daoji and said coldly, "You are very lucky. This sword is still here." After saying this, the man's body slowly moved backwards. The lower half of the man's body was covered by a blanket. Only now would people who entered the building see that he had no feet. His legs were cut off at the knees. But Li Daoji seemed to know. His gaze did not linger on the man's feet, but below the blanket that had been moved away. Under the blanket was a large black metal sword case. The man with loose hair opened the sword case and flipped through it. He took out an inky green broken sword and threw it at Li Daoji. Li Daoji reached out and firmly caught the broken sword. This was a true broken sword that was 2 feet long, and the blade was only 2 fingers wide. The tip of the sword had been completely cut off by a terrifying force, and even the remaining 2 feet of the sword was covered with dozens of thin cracks. However, the material of this sword was a bit special. Although the dark green blade was also made of some kind of metal, it had natural threads like some crystals and wood. Therefore, none of the cracks were horizontal. They extended along the blade towards the hilt. Li Daoji nodded. He saw the cloth strips used to tie things on the table in front of the man with loose hair. He casually pulled off several strips, wrapped the sword, and tied it to his back. Then he took out a money pouch and threw it to the man. The man closed the sword box and looked at Li Daoji, who had turned to leave. A strange cold smile appeared on his face. Your luck is good. No one has ever taken a liking to this remnant sword. But I do not understand what made you remember this sword that is of no use to you. Is it worth it to lose your life for a broken sword like this? Li Daoji did not speak. He silently walked out of the house and towards his carriage. A man in a crimson cotton robe had appeared behind him out of nowhere. This man looked about the same age as Li Daoji. There was a long and narrow sword mark on the left side of his face. Behind him was an exceptionally thick sword. The black scabbard was 3 times the width of an ordinary sword. The simple bronze sword hilt was at least 3 times larger than an ordinary sword hilt. This man had been following Li Daoji and maintained a distance of dozens of feet from him. Li Daoji could not have not discovered him following at such a distance. Yet, neither Li Daoji nor this man made any special expressions. Only when Li Daoji walked out of Fish Market did the two stop in unison. I told you long ago, if you dare to leave White Goat Cave, I will kill you. The man in deep red robes said coldly as he stood at the entrance to Fish Market and looked at Li Daoji, who was slowly turning around by the carriage. Li Daoji glanced at this man and still did not speak. His right hand landed on the sword hilt that gave off a faint red light. The corners of the red-robed man's lips curled up slightly, with a mocking expression. Fish Market had its rules. Even he did not dare to disregard the rules. But now that he had left Fish Market, he did not need to have any misgivings. Thus, the moment the corners of his lips curled up slightly, he had already made his move. His body did not make any obvious movements. He did not pull out the thick sword on his back. Yet, half of his body gave off a terrifying presence. A surge of vital energy gathered astounding primal energies of the universe and flooded into his right sleeve. A shrill howl suddenly sounded in the calm air. A thin, silver-white small sword flew out of his sleeve with a ferocious killing intent, leaving behind countless white vortexes. Originally, many people in the surroundings had noticed the abnormality of this red-robed man and Li Daoji. Some people had even approached in excitement. But when they heard the howl, these people immediately retreated in shock. Because this was a flying sword. A flying sword that only cultivators who had reached Realm 5, Spirit Thought Realm, could successfully cultivate. A large amount of psyche power, vital essence, and primal chi of heaven and earth gathered on the flying sword not only gave the seemingly thin sword a terrifying speed, but also a terrifying destructive power. In a battle between cultivators of this level, an out-of-control flying sword could instantly pierce through dozens of walls. Those who were unlucky enough to be cut, even if they did not die, would have something cut off from their bodies. Li Daoji's pupils contracted. His pupils were filled with the air currents behind this small silver sword, but his expression was still unusually calm. Facing this flying sword flying towards his forehead, his right hand swung out with astounding speed. With a clear hum, the red sword hilt was connected to a thin and long pure black sword body. The impact of color was unusually strong. The moment the sword left the scabbard, It turned into a flash and accurately cut towards the silver-white flying sword. Chapter 46. Seeing Li Daoji's long sword about to hit the silver flying sword, a hint of viciousness flashed across the red-robed man's face. He flicked the fingers of his left hand, and the tail of the silver flying sword that had been vibrating in the air started to vibrate even more violently. With a few sizzling sounds, several balls of air were instantly compressed into sparkling water by the violently vibrating sword body. The silver flying sword seemed to be about to break. At an inconceivable speed, it suddenly flew down and cut towards Li Daoji's neck. A muffled sound came from Li Daoji's body. A burst of power collided between his fingers and the sword hilt. The sword hilt in his hand shone with red light. The pure black blade stood perfectly straight in an instant. Yet in the next moment, this sword that was almost as long as he was bent strangely to the side under the impact of the power. The pure black sword brought out a blurred flame and directly curved into a black crescent moon. A part of the curved sword accurately blocked the small silver sword that was flying down at an astonishing speed. The two swords fiercely collided, but there was no sharp metallic clang. Instead, it was like two torrents had met. With a boom, countless balls of air exploded. The red-robed man's expression turned cold. He shouted. The fingers of his left hand spread open and forcibly controlled the silver flying sword that had already flown up more than 100 feet. At the same time, his back shook. That unusually wide and thick bronze sword shook out of its scabbard and landed in front of him. Right at this moment, his right hand reached out, grabbing the descending bronze greatsword's hilt. However, before this, a scarlet pill already flew out from his right sleeve, landing in his mouth. There was a loud boom. When this bean-sized scarlet pill entered his mouth, a terrifying rumbling sound came from his throat. It instantly turned into a scarlet stream of air and surged into his stomach. Time seemed to stop at this moment. Li Daoji's longsword was still like a black crescent moon. The blade had not bounced back, but the red-robed man's body was already moving forward. The ground under his feet had silently caved in. The reason it was silent was because even the sound had not spread yet. The bronze-colored sword was carried forward by the strong wind created by his body as he moved forward. The broad blade of the sword stuck close to his right palm as it slid forward rapidly. In each minuscule moment of contact with his right palm, large amounts of vital energy would flow from the red-robed man's palm into the large bronze sword. The body of the bronze sword lit up. A straight seal line seemed to be polished by his hand, shining from the tip of the sword to the hilt. The red-robed man's hand finally gripped the sword hilt. Boom! At this time, the explosion under his feet reached the ears of the people watching from afar. A fierce flame lit up on his thick sword. This flame was blue, like the pill fire in some pill furnaces. The red-robed man's face was scarlet red in the green flames, as if thick red mercury powder was about to seep out of his skin. The air in front of him was violently split apart by the giant sword in his hand and his body, forming two gusts of wild wind that expanded to both sides. He took a step in front of Li Daoji. The enormous sword in his hand did not look like a sword at all, but an enormous steel rod as it smashed down. The blue flame grew again and formed a blue cauldron. Li Daoji's narrow eyes narrowed into slits under the blinding light of the blue flame. He knew he could not retreat. If he retreated, the oncoming giant sword would press forward again, and the green flames would burn even more fiercely. His left hand, which had been motionless by his side, landed on his red sword hilt. Balls of white primal energies of the universe flowed out of the black sword like an enormous, white goat horn bursting out of his sword. Without any fancy moves, the long sword in his hand collided fiercely with the giant sword that was coming at him. The red-robed man gave a muffled grunt. His body fell back, but in this moment, the medicinal power that had spread through his body gave him great support. His body stood firmly at his spot, and the enormous sword in his hand continued to advance. Wild gusts of wind rose again. Li Daoji's carriage flipped to one side in the wild wind. One wheel hung in the air, and the other wheel in the axle gave off a hoarse and unpleasant sound of friction.
Boom.
Li Daoji's body seemed to have been hit by multiple chariots. He flew back dozens of feet and hit a locust tree behind him. His face was as pale as snow, but his lips were as red as blood. Blood spurted out of his back, and the bark of the locust tree he had crashed into exploded. Countless withered leaves instantly detached from the branches and fell to the ground. Dancing yellow leaves wrapped around a swordsman whose back was bloody. This beautiful scene was enough to make people think of the end. The red-robed man felt a thread of uncomfortable dryness. He knew this was the side effect of the pill medicine. Yet when he saw this scene, he still felt joy from the bottom of his heart. However, it was also at this moment that his breathing suddenly stopped. He sensed a presence of death coming from above. There were only dancing yellow leaves above him. Not right. His pupils contracted violently. In this moment, he finally saw clearly that behind a fluttering yellow leaf, there was actually a small yellow sword close to it. This small sword was only the length of 2 yellow leaves. It spun and danced with the yellow leaves as though it was weightless. The red-robed man's heart was filled with great fear. His left hand trembled, and the small silver sword floating beside him rapidly flew towards the yellow flying sword under the direction of his telekinesis. Clink, 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 countless dense crashing sounds rang out above his head. All of the yellow leaves were crushed by the rampaging sword energy. Yet the red-robed man paled even more. He found he could not keep up with the speed of this small yellow sword. Li Daoji silently raised his head. His back was separated from the broken locust tree, and countless threads of blood appeared. The threads of blood did not break in the air, but he was already in front of the red-robed man. His long sword slashed in front of the red-robed man. The black sword curved and trembled in the air. In everyone's sight, it turned into dozens of black rings of light of different sizes. Dozens of black rings of light bloomed in front of the red-robed man. The red-robed man's face suddenly turned snowy white. The enormous sword he had just raised froze in the air. There was no meaning. He couldn't sense when the true sword shadows in the dozens of rings of light would descend. Moreover, with this momentary distraction, his small silver sword had already completely lost track of that withered leaf-like small sword. Phew, there seemed to be a soft sound, but countless wounds appeared on the red-robed man's body at the same time. Thin arrows of blood sprayed out. There was a muffled sound. The red-robed man's large bronze sword fell hard to the ground. Then, his body powerlessly fell to the ground in a pitiful manner. The silver flying sword seemed to draw a silver line in the air and landed in a courtyard of the fish market behind them. How is this possible? The red-robed man looked abnormally miserable. Even his hair was soaked in his own blood. His face was covered in countless blood droplets. His body felt abnormally cold due to the large amount of blood loss. He couldn't help but tremble. He looked in shock and bewilderment at Li Daoji, who was silently treating the wounds on his back. His pale lips moved slightly. "How can you win against me?" Li Daoji struggled to pull out the numerous wooden thorns that had been driven deep into his back. At the same time, he used his foot to pick up the remnant sword wrapped in cloth that had fallen under the locust tree. He did not look at the red-robed man, or the blood seeping out of his mouth. He slowly turned and walked towards the carriage at the side.
Why?
The red-robed man shouted uncontrollably. "Your flying sword and swordsmanship are above mine. Why did you not dare to leave White Goat Cave before? Why didn't you just kill me?" Hearing the man's dazed shout, Li Daoji slowly turned around. He used a voice only the two of them could hear and said coldly, "I did not leave White Goat Cave not because I fear you, but because I do not have to prove anything. I did not kill you because there are not many Han left. You Daoan, my former senior sect brother. You are my only family left in this world." Li Daoji's figure disappeared from the carriage. The carriage, with its axles already creaking, slowly moved away. The red-robed man sat dazedly on the ground. He even forgot to stop his own bleeding. After the end of the battle, Countless gasps and cries of shock suddenly rang out in the deathly silent streets and alleys around them. Who was that person? What swordsmanship did that person use? The battle between this man called Yu Daoan and Li Daoji was very short. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was not as dangerous and soul-stirring as other Realm 5 cultivators. This was because in some of the battles involving flying swords, those flying swords were fierce and unpredictable to the extreme. Those flying swords would sometimes fall rapidly from the sky like raindrops and sometimes skim close to the ground, stirring up large clouds of dust. They would hide in the dust and fog and even silently fly out from the ground or circle behind walls and pierce through them. In those battles, the flying swords of the two sides would fight countless times in the air, and the sparks would create golden sparks around the two cultivators. But many people around Fish Market were not ordinary people. In their eyes, the short battle between Li Daoji and Yu Daoan was even more dangerous and suffocating. Yu Daoan's flying sword attack at the start was a simple killing intent that you could not block even when you knew it was changing. This was usually done by cultivators who had experienced many battles in the army. In that kind of chaotic battle, they had to quickly and easily take care of threatening opponents around them. Otherwise, if they were entangled, they could be killed by the swordsmen around them, who were usually not a threat. In the next moment, Yu Daoan swallowed a pill medicine that stimulated his potential. This kind of pill-sword path that used pill and sword in battle was a common method used by the cultivators of the destroyed Han Dynasty. But as the Han Dynasty was destroyed, pill medicines like this became rarer. Cultivators who could use the pill-sword path so skillfully also became rarer. Rarer meant harder to deal with. But an expert like this could not win against the swordsman who had left in the carriage. Also, that swordsman did not seem to be famous in Chongling and was an unknown person. At least, many of the knowledgeable people in Fish Market did not recognize Li Daoji. Chapter 47. Who is that person? In an elegant study, on the precious rosewood bookshelf, there were all kinds of books about cultivation. Although some of them looked shabby, they were all extremely precious and unique treasures. There was no pen or paper on the desk, only an open classic and a pot of white orchids. The young person sitting behind the desk was dressed in ordinary blue satin robes. He did not have any luxurious accessories, but his entire body seemed to give off light. He was Li Lingjun, who was a hostage of the Chu dynasty but gradually had a status close to a marquis in Chongling. The expression on his face had always been gentle and calm, but at this moment, in his own study, fine wrinkles had already appeared at the corners of his eyes. He had too many things to worry about. Even though he had such status in Chongling now, as long as he could not return to the capital of the Chu, his life would not be in his own hands. The road back home was too difficult. There were a lot of twists and turns, and any small matter could cause him to fall short of success. Fish Market was a unique place. All of Chongling, and even the world, had their shadows cast here. The one or two inconspicuous bubbles that popped up might be related to the fight between the two big fish deep under the water. Today, a special battle had occurred outside Fish Market. The two swordsmen had shown extraordinary strength. Even more importantly, one of the cultivators had never officially appeared in front of the people of Chongling before. So he had to understand this cultivator and the meaning behind the battle between cultivators of this level. Across from Li Lingjun, Lu Sish, dressed as a white scholar, had just entered the study. This thin man with a handsome face and bright eyes was one of Li Lingjun's most important advisors. Many things that happened in the streets of Chongling every day would pass through his hands. After his analysis, they would appear clearly in front of Li Lingjun. Compared to other advisors, he would not use his thoughts and judgment to disturb Li Lingjun's thoughts. He always stood in a position to analyze with Li Lingjun. As Li Lingjun spoke gently, Lu Sish respectfully sat down in front of him. That person is Li Daoji, the personal disciple of Shui Wangxiu of White Goat Cave. He has some fame in the sects around White Goat Cave, but after entering, he has never stepped out of White Goat Cave. So, he is very unfamiliar to the people of Chongling, Lu Sish said slowly, his voice sharp and clear. He and Yu Daoan are survivors of the Han Dynasty and were once disciples of the Han Dynasty's E-Sword sect. Later, the Han Dynasty was defeated, and only he and Yu Daoan were left of the E-Sword sect. Both of them were imprisoned for crimes and were pardoned when the Yuanwu Emperor ascended the throne. Later, Li Daoji was seen by Shui Wangxiu for some reason. Shui Wangxiu loved talent and took Li Daoji into White Goat Cave. Yu Daoan thought that Li Daoji had taken a thief as his father and betrayed his sect. He said that Li Daoji would either die of old age in White Goat Cave, or if he left White Goat Cave, he would kill Li Daoji. The two should have fought before. While their vital energy and cultivation levels were similar, Li Daoji should have been much weaker than Yu Daoan in the past. Before fighting Yu Daoan, Li Daoji went to Fish Market and bought a sword from Sun Bing. Then he fought with Yu Daoan. After the battle, he returned to White Goat Cave. Then I noticed something else. White Goat Cave made an exception and took in a student. That student was the youth Ding Ning from the Falling Parasol wine shop. He reached profound understanding in half a day after joining the sect. Profound understanding in half a day? Li Lingjuan's expression had been unusually calm before this, but when he heard this, his brow suddenly furrowed. He unconsciously repeated the words, and his expression grew ugly. That day in Falling Parasol, he had discussed with this youth with great sincerity and made a promise. Everyone knew that he was a man of his words, but he had been humiliated. He disliked this young man very much. Later on, when he thought about it, he suddenly realized that before this young man had rejected him, he had already felt an inexplicable dislike for this young man when he first saw him. It seemed to be because of the youth's gaze that was calmer than his own. He seemed to feel that this youth would be a great threat to him in the future. This was a strange intuition that did not seem to have any logic. Yet in the past, it was not hard to find examples like this. Profound understanding in half a day. In my memories, in the decades since the Yuanwu Emperor ascended the throne, only 2 people in Chongling were able to do this. He frowned deeply and looked up at Lu Sish. Since Li Daoji has endured for 10 years, then if there are no special accidents, he will continue to endure. So, I think that Li Daoji's coming out of seclusion most likely has a great deal to do with this wine shop youth. Lu Sish nodded. He had the same thoughts as Li Lingjun. Just some old grudges and conflicts between sections. There is no need to worry. Li Lingjun thought and said, but I do not like this youth. Before this, Li Lingjun had expressed his dislike of Ding Ning. But because Ding Ning's status was so low, even if he expressed such intentions, Lu Sish and Chinmoli, his loyal retainers, would not do anything against Ding Ning. But it was different now. Ding Ning had entered White Goat Cave and reached profound understanding in half a day. Now that Li Lingjun said this, Lu Sish knew he had to take care of this youth. Chongling is a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Li Lingjun was silent for a moment. As Lu Sish stood to leave, he said softly. In Lu Sish's ears, Lu Sish only thought that he was sighing at Ding Ning's profound understanding in half a day and Li Daoji's strength. But what Lu Sish did not expect was that Li Lingjun was still thinking of that wine shop in the alley and that stunning woman. He thought that if the young man was a little surprised, the beautiful woman in the wine shop might also change her mind. There were countless possibilities in life. If one did not easily give up, they might be able to turn one possibility into reality. Ding Ning was still cultivating. The energies in his body were immersed in his energy sea. At an unusually slow speed that was very fast for other cultivators, they moved towards the Jade Palace in the depths of his energy sea. At the same time, the countless invisible larvae in his body were also constantly devouring most of the spirit chi that seeped into his body, constantly causing subtle changes to his body. This was a profound and indescribable cultivation of 2 paths at the same time. Ding Ning sensed the cultivation of these 2 paths. A faint joy spread through his perception. Spirit veins were too rare, and he had not been in contact with spirit chi for too long. He had even forgotten the taste and effect of spirit chi. At this moment, As he felt those young silkworms devouring the spirit chi, he began to realize that although this spirit vein was small, it could at least double the speed of his cultivation. Based on this speed, in a month's time, when his cultivation of the three corpses non-self origin sutra broke through to the second realm, his true cultivation should also be able to break through from the second realm middle-class bone washing to the second realm high-class marrow changing. Suddenly, the countless invisible young silkworms in his body disappeared without a trace. He stopped cultivating and opened his eyes with great vigilance. "Sect Uncle Li Daoji?" he exclaimed softly. "Since you have detected my arrival, come out." Li Daoji's cold voice sounded outside the grass hut. Ding Ning stood up from the meditation mat. The moment he pushed open the door and walked out of the grass hut, his brow furrowed slightly. He smelled the unusual stench of blood. Looking at Li Daoji's unusual posture, he asked in shock, "You are wounded?" Li Daoji's sharp eyebrows rose slightly. He did not say anything and threw the remnant sword wrapped in cloth to Ding Ning. He said coldly, "Since you are studying the wildfire sword, then you need a sword." Ding Ning stilled. From the moment he caught the sword, he sensed that this was a remnant sword. He quickly untied the cloth. He found that there were many dried bloodstains on the cloth. When the inky green remnant sword appeared in his sight, his pupils imperceptibly contracted. His expression was still calm, but there was a complicated emotion that was colder than the autumn wind rising in his heart. He knew very well what kind of sword this was. He knew very well what kind of material this sword was made of and what it was used for. He even knew very well how this sword was made, because he recognized this sword. Or rather, this sword had an unusual relationship with him. Swords and cultivation methods are the same. The most important thing is suitability. But if you feel it is not suitable, you can leave it and not use it. Looking at Ding Ning's silence and unusual gaze, Li Daoji thought that he disliked the remnant sword. "Thank you." Ding Ning's hand landed on the hilt of the sword. He looked at the cracks on the inky green remnant sword and softly expressed his thanks. His voice was a little low, but it was sincere from the bottom of his heart. Li Daoji did not speak and turned to leave. "Did you get wounded because of the sword?" Ding Ning looked at his back and suddenly asked. Li Daoji turned slightly and said coldly, "You are too curious and too smart. You should know that people who are too smart and curious do not live long." Ding Ning looked calmly at the sword in his hand and said softly, without looking up, "If I am not smart and curious, I will not live long." Li Daoji's body froze. Ding Ning smiled coldly. His finger brushed across the surface of the remnant sword. Threads of light flashed through the cracks on the blade of the remnant sword. It was as though countless tiny dark green flowers were about to bloom on the sword. Chapter 48. Autumn grew deeper, and the white frost on the withered vines grew as thick as snow. In a stone room of the Green Vine Sword Academy, Nangong Kaishu sat with her head bowed. Invisible primal energies of the universe danced around her. Much of the primal energies landed on her body, seeped into her clothing, and landed on her skin. This was something that would happen when anyone sat in meditation. Even if they were not cultivators, the primal energies of the universe would fill their bodies. Yet this night, there seemed to be some unexpected changes. When the invisible primal energies of the universe landed on her skin, they inexplicably flashed with many tiny stars of light and gave off light. Nangong Saishu's entire body seemed to turn into jade. Yet she had sunk into a deep sleep during her cultivation. The physical energy in her body was still like an absolutely silent pond. So she could not see this scene and did not know what kind of change was happening to her. Only when the sky started to brighten and birds flew between the vines in the distance and white frost fell like snow did she slowly wake up. Even when she woke up, she didn't feel any obvious changes. Only when she habitually channeled her physical energy, moved her blood, and made her body more awake did she sense that her physical energy was completely different from before. Her physical energy seemed to be mixed with countless water droplets, causing all the physical energy to become sticky and become a strange liquid. She was stunned. Then she became excited, unprecedentedly excited. She knew what had happened, but she had not expected to complete this step in her sleep. She had a breakthrough. In her sleep, she had gone from Realm 2 Energy Refinement Realm to Realm 3 Vital Energy Realm. She sat in a daze for a long time in excitement. Then she jumped up. She did not immediately comprehend the difference between vital energy and vital energy. She did not immediately comprehend her new realm. Instead, she went to her desk and used her fastest speed to grind the ink. Then she solemnly picked up her brush and started to write a letter. Father, I have succeeded in my breakthrough. My cultivation speed is ranked 3rd among the students of the Green Vine Sword Academy in these 10 years. The weather is cold. Remember to wear more clothes. Also, I wonder if there is any progress on the pill medicine I asked Father to find to increase my cultivation. If possible, can you speed it up? She did not like to waste words, and was prepared to put down her brush and seal the letter. But when she thought of Ding Ning's physical condition and how he did not have much time for the future and could only focus on the present, she hesitated slightly. The tip of her brush trembled. Then she added, because I am only using it for a transaction and not for my own use, as long as it has the effect of increasing my cultivation, it does not matter even if it has negative effects on my body. After writing this letter and carefully sealing it, she couldn't help but glance in the direction of White Goat Cave before she started to comprehend the difference between Vital Energy Realm and Energy Refinement Realm. She murmured to herself, so many days have passed. I wonder how your cultivation has progressed. The Sword Trial Festival is getting closer. For this straightforward and chivalrous young woman, if the pill medicine she asked for was only to be used for a transaction, then what she hoped to trade for was Ding Ning's friendship. Nangong Saishu's letter started to be passed along the road. Another night, Ding Ning walked out of the gates of White Goat Cave. Just like usual, he entered the carriage waiting at the gates. In the dark and bumpy carriage, Ding Ning's hand once again touched the inky green remnant sword that usually hung from his waist and now lay across his knees. Even though more than half a month had passed since Li Daoji had brought this sword to him, and there were only a few days left until the Green Vine Sword Academy's Sword Trial Festival, every time he saw this inky green remnant sword, he would have a different feeling. This sword was called Last Flower. In reality, this sword's original name was Jasmine Flower. This was a sword from the Bazin Kendo ground. When vital energy flowed into the sword would shine like countless jasmine flowers. This had originally been a beautiful and charming sword. However, when the previous owner of this sword used this sword, every time he attacked, it was filled with absolute fierceness that left no room for maneuver. Every strike was like the last strike he could make. Every strike was like the end of his life. Every strike was like a flower that could not see the next day. Swords in the hands of different owners would become different swords and have different fates. It was precisely because this sword's owner's personality was straightforward and unreasonable, without any leeway, that this sword would eventually become such a broken sword. The appearance of such a sword reminded Ding Ning of the many debts he owed and had to collect. The carriage passed through the night, entering the walled Chongling and the flat streets. However, compared to the mountain path, the straight streets and alleys were even more bumpy. After some strange sounds came from under the carriage, and the carriage swayed strangely, the carriage slowly stopped. The middle-aged man driving the carriage explained apologetically to Ding Ning in the carriage, maybe the axle was not repaired well last time, and we were in a hurry, so some problems occurred. Ding Ning asked a few questions about how he could find a place to repair the carriage so late at night, and if there would be problems with the carriage tomorrow morning. Seeing that they were not far from Falling Parasol, he declined the suggestion of the White Goat Cave worker to rent a carriage to send him to Falling Parasol. He told the worker to repair the carriage and then walked towards Falling Parasol. Some of the streets outside Falling Parasol were ordinary residences. These residents who had worked for a day were sleeping soundly. Occasionally, the weak light of the lanterns swayed in the bleak autumn wind. Ding Ning was very familiar with such a situation. No matter how bleak the autumn wind was, it could not arouse his emotions. Yet when he walked through a dark alley, his brow suddenly furrowed deeply. He looked up at the roof to the left. His strong intuition that ordinary cultivators did not have caused his mind to focus. Just as he raised his head, several soft noises suddenly rang out in the deathly silent street. More than a dozen crossbow bolts whose tips had been purposefully sharpened to reduce the sound of the air tearing fell from the roof with murderous intent. Ding Ning's expression turned cold. His body quickly lowered, and he nimbly dodged under the eaves to the side. He easily dodged this round of arrows. Ding ding ding, there was a burst of explosions. The crossbow bolts that missed bounced on the ground like broken grass. A flurry of footsteps sounded. 10 or 20 figures flashed out from the alley behind him. There was a cold light on the backs of these figures, but in their hands, there was a sharpened bamboo pole that was several feet long. At the same time, more than a dozen figures appeared in the alley in front of him. They also carried sharp weapons on their backs and held sharpened bamboo poles in their hands. Ding Ning's expression did not change, but he took a deep breath and gripped the inky green remnant sword in his right hand. He did not know the origins of these people, but these people were clearly experienced and would not show mercy. This place was a certain distance from Falling Parasol. Zhang Sun Qianxue could not quickly discover that he was fighting here and could not come in time. So this place was likely to be his end. He glanced at the last flower remnant sword in the darkness. Every crack was unusually straight towards the sword hilt, and started to run. His thin body immediately pressed against the eaves and turned into a rapidly flowing black wind. At the alley in front of him, the people at the front immediately saw his astounding speed and the reflection of the remnant sword in his hand. These people seemed to have not expected the target they were assassinating to possess such power. In a flash, their eyes showed fear. But in the next moment, they still moved forward and made space for the people behind them. Most of the dozen sharpened bamboo poles did not directly stab towards Ding Ning's body, but chaotically stabbed around Ding Ning's body. These crisscrossing bamboo poles were like the simplest seal formations in the world, and immediately divided the area around Ding Ning into countless small pieces. Yet a small portion of these people felt their hands lighten. The bamboo poles in their hands were cut in half. Most of the bamboo poles were still crisscrossing, but there was a straight path in front of Ding Ning. His rapidly advancing body didn't stop at all. In the darkness, a man in his 30s with braided hair at the front suddenly gave a scream. Ding Ning's body charged into his arms like a leopard, and the inky green remnant sword in his hand immediately entered and exited his abdomen several times. Hot blood sprayed onto the ground, and a pale, white sword light flashed.
An assassin next to this man reacted.
Ignoring the braided man who was about to die, he swept his sword forward. Yet with a soft hiss, a patch of wild grass seemed to form in front of him and formed a grassland. This man retreated in shock. The sword moves of this thin youth in front of him were extremely dense and complex. He felt that he could not stop the other's sword moves from spreading, even if the other only had a 2-foot-long remnant sword. At this time, he suddenly felt his wrist was very cold. At this time, he found that the soft hiss just now had come from his wrist. Then, his eyes widened in fear. He saw his hand holding the sword separated from his wrist, spraying out a spray of blood. Ding Ning's eyes did not show any emotion. His body seemed to squeeze past the man with the broken wrist. The shadows of the inky green remnant sword in his hand spread through the grass and swept through the abdomens of the two assassins in front of him. Pew pew, 2 waves of blood sprayed in the bleak autumn wind. What sword move is this? Such a complex sword move, this youth uses it well. In an alley behind these terrified assassins, a masked man in black robes sat on the steps under the eaves. Looking at the blood and the inky green sword shadows in the air, he frowned slightly and gave a sincere sigh of admiration. Chapter 49. Any swordsmanship, including the flying sword, would have the most reasonable sword moves when facing different weapons and methods of attacks. Pick, push, lift, stab, cut, drag, knock, shake sword moves made from all kinds of sword moves. When one was familiar with them, they would naturally use the most reasonable move to deal with an attack. It would be the most effective way to deal damage to the enemy and would not hinder one's next attack. But the things that sword manuals focused on were very different. For example, the horse-slaying sword and the heavy stone sword manual that were commonly seen in the Qin dynasty's army only pursued the power of one blow. The wind-chasing swordsmanship pursued the absolute speed of a stab. The different emphasis resulted in the simplicity and complexity of the sword moves recorded in the sword manuals. The Wildfire Sword Manual was a very unpopular sword manual. Not many people practiced it, so the masked man sitting on the cold steps did not recognize it. However, he could see that this sword style paid attention to many aspects. Each sword move had 5 or 6 different variations to counter the opponent's attacks, and the many variations that could be used in succession. This caused the sword moves of this sword manual to be very dense and complicated. In a small area, it was like there was a patch of wild grass growing, and then a wildfire would rise and attack at any time. But the complicated sword moves were sometimes not simple and direct enough. They were not smooth enough in exerting power, and were lacking in speed and power. Even more importantly, the more complicated it was, the harder it was to master. Some sword manuals did not care about the enemy's attack, and only cared about slashing. But for a sword manual like the Wildfire Sword, when facing the enemy's slash, there would be at least 5 or 6 different ways to deal with it. Sometimes, when there were too many ways to deal with it, one would hesitate and think about which one to use. This would cause one to think about what kind of sword move they should follow after using one. The reason that Ding Ning had won the heartfelt praise of the masked man was because his sword moves did not have any hesitation or sloppiness. It was a complex sword technique that was clearly good at defense and weak at counterattacking. However, in his hands, it was forcefully made to have a fierce and decisive feeling. In the information the masked man had obtained, this wine shop youth had just entered White Goat Cave to cultivate for 20 days. Even most of the new disciples of Min Mountain Sword Sect and Lingshu Sword Gate would not be able to do this. But the more this wine shop youth's talent was appreciated, the more he had to die here today. Ding Ning's lips were pressed together tightly. The remnant sword in his hand mercilessly cut through the throat of a person in front of him. That person had just swung a horse-slaying blade when the air and blood in his throat suddenly disappeared. This person could not breathe and fell forward before he could even scream. Since then, 6 people had fallen around him. However, this kind of fierce battle was a heavy burden on his current cultivation and body. His breath was already burning. In the night sky above him, more than a dozen streaks of light suddenly appeared. His feet suddenly stopped, and he exerted strength again. His thin and small body passed under the armpit of the person in front of him like lightning. The broken sword in his right hand swung over and cut open a huge wound on the side of the person's waist. In the darkness, this assassin gave a beastly howl. Because of this blow, his entire body paused. In this pause, more than a dozen streaks of light fell. With a series of pops, more than a dozen arrows pierced his body and brought out dozens of balls of blood. 7 people had fallen in a flash. Even the dozen assassins in the back of the alley paled and found it difficult to move their feet. And they say they are iron-blooded men used to big scenes. They are afraid of being killed like this. They are not even as good as ordinary Qin soldiers. Bandits are bandits. They are not presentable. The masked man with a Taoist bun said to himself as he stood up. The moment he stood up, Ding Ning felt something strange. In the darkness, the eyes of this masked man in black robes started to shine like gemstones, and even his skin started to shine like fireflies. Ding Ning's body became slightly stiff, and his heart started to beat violently. He knew that a truly terrifying enemy had finally appeared. The instant this masked black-clothed man began to move, all of the assassins who previously blocked this long alley with bamboo poles, apart from those who were lying on the ground and unable to crawl back up, all of them retreated one after another. The masked man in black robes passed over the retreating people and faced Ding Ning, who was panting. His disdainful gaze flashed across the corpses around Ding Ning. He said seriously, "Such vicious tactics. If I did not see it with my own eyes, I would not believe that this came from a cultivator who started cultivating less than a month ago." Ding Ning lowered the last flower sword in his right hand and let the blood drip down along the cracks. He adjusted his breathing and looked calmly at the masked man in black robes. He asked, "Who are you?" "You definitely want to know who wants to kill you, but it is a pity that I cannot tell you. If these people can kill you, then I can just sit there and watch and get the same price." The masked man smiled. "I am just a person responsible for killing you." Ding Ning did not say anything else because the masked man in black robes had started to walk again. Regardless of why the other was interested in speaking with him, the other clearly would not waste time. He took a deep breath and did not try to flee. Facing a cultivator in vital energy realm, fleeing would only cause him to die faster. The masked man's gaze was absolutely calm and murderous. A vicious and murderous energy emanated from his body. His footsteps were very stable, and they seemed to be at the same frequency. However, his figure was getting faster and faster. When he took the third step, his feet had completely left the ground, and his whole body was flying forward. The masked man's right hand moved slightly. A wave of primal energies of the universe surged out of his body, causing his sleeve to feel like it was about to explode. But in the next moment, there was no reflection of a weapon in his hand. His hands were empty. There was no sword at his waist or on his back. A thin piece of yellow paper floated out of his sleeve. Seeing such a light piece of yellow paper, Ding Ning's eyes suddenly narrowed. A wave of cold rose from the bottom of his heart. His feet moved, and he retreated as quickly as he could. At the same time, the remnant sword in his hand slapped forward rapidly to expel the air in front of him. Inky green sword shadows formed in front of him like rows of tree branches. The thin yellow paper that flew out from the black-clothed masked man's sleeve made a light sound in the air and scattered into countless tiny ashes. As the ashes spread outwards, the path of the true essence contained within them burned fiercely in an instant, forming a terrifying fireball with a diameter of 10 feet. Ding Ning closed his eyes. His left hand landed on his sword hilt and slapped forward with another sword shadow. There was a loud explosion. The dark and cold streets were filled with an endless sense of dryness. Countless drifting flames flew a few feet in the air, then mysteriously disappeared completely. Ding Ning's entire body flew backwards behind the bursting fireball. Countless black holes appeared on his white goat cave robes. Even his young face was scorched. The web between his thumb and index finger was torn. Blood flowed down the sword hilt. However, there was no fear on his face. Looking at Ding Ning, who still gripped his sword tightly, the masked man frowned slightly. The fact that this attack had not killed Ding Ning had exceeded his greatest expectations. At this time, he did not want any more accidents. He took a deep breath, and the vital energy in his body surged out again. A piece of yellow paper flew out of his right sleeve again. This thin piece of yellow paper was not as weightless as the first piece of yellow paper and did not disappear. Instead, this piece of yellow paper fell hard to the ground like a heavy gold brick. There was a muffled boom. The dozens of stones on the ground immediately cracked, and the earth exploded. Each piece of stone and earth was infused with primal energies of the universe and became unusually heavy. They all jumped up and pressed down on Ding Ning. The remnant sword in Ding Ning's hand once again turned into sword shadows. Flick, slice, chop, hack, all kinds of sword moves formed a dense sword presence in front of him. Muffled sounds sounded. He retreated a dozen steps. A piece of broken bluestone smashed heavily on his ribs. Poof! A mouthful of blood gushed out from his mouth. The masked black-haired man narrowed his eyes. His eyes flashed with surprise and shock once again. To his surprise, Ding Ning was only injured and was able to survive his attack. You are not going to make it. What are you waiting for? This kind of persistence will only cause you more pain before you die. The masked, black-haired man couldn't help but sigh as he held a yellow talisman in his right hand. The complicated emotions that arose from this accident caused him to sigh softly. Ding Ning still did not speak. He took a deep breath and raised his sword to his eyebrows. The masked man's coldness made his eyebrows seem to be covered in a layer of frost. He shouted, and the vital energy and primal energies of the universe in his hand blew out the seal in his hand. The moment the seal flew out of his sleeve, it disappeared without a trace. Then snow started to fall in front of him. Pure white snowflakes formed in the air. The edges of each snowflake grew sharper. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.